Chapter 41. The Distance Game. Damon stepped back, his eyes fixed intently on his opponent, Johnny Creed. He took in every detail, from Johnny's compact, muscular build to his short stature. Damon's mind worked quickly, formulating a strategy to exploit Johnny's limitations. He decided to maintain a safe distance, utilizing his height advantage to keep Johnny at bay. Damon adopted a traditional Muay Thai stance, his feet shoulder-width apart, with his left foot forward and his right foot back. He kept his knees slightly bent, his weight evenly distributed between both legs. His hands were up, with his left hand in front of his left ear and his right hand in front of his right ear. His elbows were close to his body, with his forearms parallel to the ground. Johnny, on the other hand, took on a classic boxing stance, his feet shoulder-width apart, with his left foot forward and his right foot back. His hands were up, with his left hand in front of his left ear and his right hand in front of his right ear. His elbows were close to his body, with his forearms parallel to the ground. Michael Bosley, the commentator, spoke in a clear, excited voice, and there they are, folks. Damon Cross, the debutante, taking on Johnny Creed, the experienced boxer. It looks like we have a Muay Thai versus boxing matchup, which should make for an interesting fight. Daniel Green, the co-commentator, nodded in agreement. That's right, Michael. And looking at Damon's stance, it seems he's planning to utilize his height advantage to keep Johnny at a distance. The referee, a tall, imposing figure, stood between them, his eyes fixed on both fighters. The referee pointed on the middle, moving back, signaling the start of the fight. Damon and Johnny circled each other cautiously. Damon kept his stance wide, his long arms extended, ready to jab at any moment. He knew he had to keep Johnny at a distance. The shorter fighter was powerful and explosive, likely to charge in with a flurry of punches if given the chance. Johnny feinted a jab, testing Damon's reactions. Damon didn't bite, keeping his composure and maintaining the gap between them. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, their energy buzzing in the air. But he blocked it out, focusing solely on Johnny. Suddenly, Johnny lunged forward with a fast combination. Jab, jab, hook. Damon stepped back swiftly, using his reach to his advantage. Johnny's punches missed by inches, and Damon countered with a sharp teep kick, his long leg driving into Johnny's midsection. The crowd let out a murmur of approval. Michael Bosley's voice echoed through the venue. That was a smart move by Damon, keeping Johnny at bay with that teep kick. He's using his height just as we thought. Daniel Green added, Johnny needs to find a way to close the distance. Damon's reach is going to be a problem if Johnny doesn't get inside. Johnny wasn't discouraged. He kept moving, slipping to the side and trying to find an opening. At Nobleman at. Damon could see the gears turning in Johnny's mind, the way he was constantly analyzing, looking for a weak spot. Damon jabbed again, quick and sharp, trying to keep Johnny on the outside. Johnny bobbed and weaved, slipping under Damon's reach, and then shot in close. He landed a solid body shot, the impact vibrating through Damon's ribs. Damon grunted but kept his composure. He quickly clinched Johnny, using his height to pull him into a knee strike. Ha! The crowd gasped as Damon's knee connected with Johnny's torso, but Johnny twisted out of the clinch, stepping back to avoid further damage. Damon's worked like a machine. Johnny was quick, and he clearly knew what he was doing. Damon needed to stay disciplined, stick to the plan, and not let Johnny draw him into a brawl. Johnny moved in again, faking a jab and then ducking low, aiming for a takedown. Damon reacted instantly, sprawling his legs out to defend. He shoved Johnny away, creating space, and then followed up with a stiff right cross. It grazed Johnny's cheek, but the shorter fighter slipped most of the impact. Johnny bounced back on his feet, unfazed. He was relentless, pressing forward, trying to get inside Damon's range again. Damon's doing a great job keeping Johnny at a distance, but Johnny's not making it easy, Michael commented. This is turning into a real chess match. Daniel replied, yeah, and you can see Johnny's experience here. He's patient, waiting for his moment. Damon needs to stay sharp. Johnny came at him again, this time with a low kick aimed at Damon's lead leg. Damon checked it with his shin, then fired back with a quick jab and a hard cross. Johnny dodged, but not fast enough. The cross clipped him, sending him stumbling back a step. Damon pressed the advantage, stepping forward with a knee to the body, but Johnny slipped out of range just in time. He countered with a fast hook that caught Damon on the jaw. It wasn't a full-powered shot, but it stung, snapping Damon's head to the side. Damon shook off the hit, his thoughts focused and clear. He couldn't let Johnny get the upper hand. He had to keep control of the fight, use his reach, and stay disciplined. Johnny was tough, but Damon knew he was just as capable. They circled each other again, the tension thick in the air. Damon jabbed, then faked a teep kick, trying to keep Johnny guessing. Johnny was cautious, his eyes locked on Damon, waiting for his chance. As they closed in again, Damon noticed the fight was heating up, and everyone could sense it. But Damon wasn't thinking about the crowd. He was thinking about Johnny, about the next move, about staying one step ahead. Just as Damon threw a low kick, Johnny exploded forward with a sudden flurry of punches, trying to overwhelm him. Damon's instincts kicked in. He leaned back, using his height to avoid most of the shots, then countered with a swift uppercut. The uppercut connected cleanly, snapping Johnny's head back. The crowd erupted, the noise deafening. Johnny staggered but didn't go down, his experience keeping him on his feet. Michael's voice boomed, "What a shot." Damon just landed a solid uppercut, and Johnny felt that one. Daniel added, "But Johnny's still standing. This guy's tough, and Damon needs to keep the pressure on." Damon's mind was racing, but his body moved on autopilot. He saw the opportunity and went for it, stepping in with a powerful right hook. Johnny ducked just in time, the punch sailing over his head. Johnny countered with a hook of his own, aiming for Damon's ribs. The shot connected, and Damon felt the wind rush out of him. He clenched his teeth, trying not to show any pain. He couldn't let Johnny see any weakness. Not now. They separated again, both fighters breathing heavily. The shot connected, and Damon felt the wind rush out of him. He clenched his teeth, trying not to show any pain. He couldn't let Johnny see any weakness. Not now. They separated again, both fighters breathing heavily. Damon could feel the fight slipping into a rhythm, the back and forth of two skilled opponents testing each other, trying to find a crack in the other's defense. But Damon knew he had to do more than just survive. He had to win, and he had to do it in style. The quest still lingered in the back of his mind, pushing him to go for a dramatic finish. Chapter 42. The Turning Point. Round 1 continued, and Damon and Johnny were both showing signs of fatigue. Damon's breath was coming in quick gasps, and his face was starting to show the effects of the fight. A red spot formed on his cheek from Johnny's punches. Johnny, too, had a few red marks and swelling from Damon's earlier strikes. Damon's strategy to keep Johnny at bay had worked well, but Johnny was skilled at finding openings. Damon felt the pressure mounting, his mind racing with frustration. He was beginning to make small mistakes, letting Johnny close the distance more often. As they engaged again, Johnny threw a quick combination. Jab, jab, hook. Damon tried to respond with a kick, but Johnny ducked under it and landed a solid right hand to Damon's jaw. Damon staggered, feeling the sting of the punch. He grimaced, but Johnny didn't press the attack, choosing to circle instead. The referee moved in to break them apart, and the round ended. The bell rang, signaling the end of round 1. Michael Bosley's voice cut through the noise. "What a round. Damon Cross has shown some impressive skill with his height advantage, but Johnny Creed has landed some solid shots and kept the pressure on." Daniel Green added, "That's right, Michael. Damon's got the height and reach, but Johnny's experience is showing. Damon's making some mistakes now, letting Johnny close the distance more than he should." In Johnny's corner, his coach was giving him a detailed rundown. "Damon's height is a problem for us, but we're getting inside. He's showing some fatigue, and his kicks are getting sloppier. Keep pressuring him and make him work harder. He's starting to make mistakes, so capitalize on it. Use your speed and combinations to break through his defense." Johnny nodded, his face determined. "Got it." Damon sat on his stool in his corner, alone but focused. He took a few deep breaths, trying to shake off the frustration. His body ached, but he knew he had to keep going. He wiped the sweat from his brow and stood up as the bell rang for round 2. The fight resumed. Damon started the round with a series of leg kicks, trying to regain control and tire Johnny out. His kicks landed with thuds, hitting Johnny's thighs and causing him to wince. Johnny tried to counter with a jab, but Damon was determined, pushing forward with more leg kicks. Each time Johnny tried to close the distance, Damon's kicks kept him at bay. The red marks on Johnny's legs were starting to show the impact of Damon's attack. Damon could feel his anger rising. He was frustrated with his earlier mistakes and determined to make up for them. His mind was focused, but his emotions were running high. He started to throw kicks with more intensity, his frustration fueling his aggression. "Damn it, why am I messing this up?" Damon muttered to himself, frustration evident in his voice. I need to finish this. Johnny moved in with a series of fast punches, trying to break through Damon's defenses. Damon tried to keep his distance but found himself cornered. Johnny's punches were coming fast, landing several blows to Damon's ribs and face. Damon clenched his jaw, his anger building. He felt a surge of adrenaline as he pushed through the pain. Fuck this, he shouted as he launched a wild, powerful right hook. His technique was sloppy, but the raw power behind the punch was undeniable. Johnny's eyes widened in surprise as the punch connected with his jaw. The impact was enough to send him crashing to the canvas. The crowd erupted in shock, their voices rising in disbelief. The referee moved in quickly, ready to separate them if necessary. Damon saw Johnny go down and knew this was his chance. He pounced, aiming to finish the fight. He threw a flurry of hammer strikes, his fists raining down on Johnny. Johnny tried to cover up, but Damon's relentless attacks were too much. The referee stepped in, grabbing Damon and pulling him away to stop the barrage. As the referee's hand shot up, signaling the end of the match, Damon felt his breath catch short in his chest. He stood frozen for a moment, his eyes fixed on the referee's raised hand, his mind struggling to process the reality of the situation. Then, as the crowd's cheers washed over him like a wave, he grinned, his lips spreading wide across his face. I did it, he breathed, the words barely audible over the din of the crowd. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs, and looked down at Johnny, still knocked out on the canvas. He knew his last strike had been sloppy, a wild and uncontrolled swing that had caught Johnny flush on the jaw. And he knew that going after Johnny after he went down, hammering him with punch after punch, had been the deciding factor in the fight. The crowd's cheers grew louder, a deafening roar that filled the arena and reverberated off the walls. Damon felt his heart pounding in his chest, his pulse racing with excitement and adrenaline. He raised his arms, his fists clenched in triumph, and let out a shout of victory. Michael Bosley's voice cut through the noise, his words echoing off the walls of the arena. That is spectacular. A magnificent debut, as Damon Cross secures his first win. His partner, Daniel Green, chuckled and added, he is now 1-0, and I gotta say, despite what I said in the beginning, I still stand by it. With skills like that, he can do better in the higher weight class. As the commentators spoke, Johnny began to stir on the canvas, his body slowly coming back to life. He moved his arms, his hands flexing as he tried to sit up. The referee moved in, his hands helping Johnny to his feet, and the crowd's cheers grew even louder. Damon stood tall, his chest heaving with exhaustion, his arms still raised in triumph. He felt the sweat dripping down his face. He grinned, his lips still spread wide across his face, and let out another shout of victory, basking in the adoration of the crowd. C-43. Chapter 43. The announcement. Johnny was now standing, talking to his coach, who was offering words of encouragement and analysis of the fight. Damon, on the other hand, stood next to the cage, waiting for the announcer to enter. His chest was still heaving with exhaustion, and his arms were still raised in triumph. The referee moved to the middle of the octagon, calling both fighters to join him. The announcer, a tall, slender man with a booming voice, entered the cage, a microphone in hand. The crowd was still cheering, their voices echoing off the walls of the arena. The lights were shining brightly, illuminating every detail of the scene. Damon's eyes were fixed on the announcer, his face still flushed with excitement and adrenaline. Michael Bosley's voice came through the broadcast, his words clear and concise. Now the question is he going to be like the Titan? Because, looking at him now, they are very similar. No fighting records, but very experienced. No team, no coach. We might be looking at another rising star. Daniel Green agreed, his voice equally clear. I see what you mean, and that's possible. But only time can tell. He's got talent, let's hope he doesn't waste it. The announcer raised his hands, calling for silence. The crowd slowly quieted down, their voices dying away. The announcer smiled, his eyes shining with excitement. The referee grasped the hands of both fighters, his grip firm but gentle. The crowd's cheers subsided slightly, their voices dropping to a gentle hum as they awaited the official announcement. The announcer's voice boomed through the arena, his words clear and concise. Ladies and gentlemen, referee John Doe has called a stop to this contest at 2 minutes and 35 seconds in the second round, declaring the winner by TKO, Damon Cross. As the announcer spoke, the referee raised Damon's hand high into the air, his arm straight and his fist clenched. The crowd erupted into cheers once more, their voices growing louder and more intense. Damon's face broke into a wide grin, his eyes shining with pride and excitement. He felt a surge of joy and elation, his heart racing with excitement. He had done it. He had won. As he stood there, basking in the adoration of the crowd, Damon couldn't help but think of one thing. At Nobleman at. He wished, just for once, that Grant Parker was the one announcing his victory. He wanted to hear those iconic words, "It's me." And the winner, by TKO, Damon Cross. But for now, he was content with the announcer's words, and the crowd's cheers. He took a deep breath, savoring the moment, and let the referee's grip on his hand guide him around the octagon, basking in the glory of his victory. The lights shone brightly overhead, illuminating every detail of the scene. The crowd's cheers grew louder still, a deafening roar that filled the arena. Damon's face glowed with pride, his eyes shining like stars. He was the winner, and he knew it. The referee released Damon's hand, and Damon thanked him with a simple, "Thanks." The referee nodded in response, his face breaking into a small smile as he said, "Congratulations." Johnny approached Damon, his hand stretched out in a gesture of respect. Damon smiled, taking Johnny's hand in his and shaking it firmly. Then, in a show of sportsmanship, Damon pulled Johnny into a hug. "Thanks, great match," Damon said, his voice sincere. Johnny patted Damon's back, his eyes shining with genuine admiration. "Nah, you deserve it. You're good," Johnny replied, his voice filled with conviction. Damon nodded humbly, his face still flushed with excitement. "I still have a lot to learn," he said, his voice filled with a desire to improve. The two fighters shared a moment of mutual respect, their differences forgotten in the spirit of competition. They said their goodbyes, and Johnny walked towards his team, who were waiting for him with nods of encouragement. Damon, on the other hand, walked towards the gate, leaving the cage behind. As he stepped out of the octagon, the bright lights of the arena gave way to the dimmer glow of the backstage area. The sounds of the crowd grew fainter, replaced by the murmur of voices and the rustle of movement. Damon made his way back to the back room, his footsteps echoing off the walls. Michael Bosley turned to his partner, Daniel Green, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Well, Daniel, this was a hell of an opening match," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "I think I'll expect more from him. He'll certainly shake up the B flyweight division." Daniel Green nodded in agreement, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "Indeed," he said, his voice clear and concise. "I almost forgot it was an opening match. The way Damon Cross performed out there, it was like he was a seasoned veteran." Michael Bosley chuckled, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "I know what you mean," he said. "He's got a lot of potential, and I think we'll be seeing great things from him in the future." Daniel Green leaned forward, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "As for him staying in the flyweight division, I think we'll be seeing him higher on the next division soon," he said. "He's got the skills and the talent to make a real impact in the sport." Damon entered his room, his footsteps echoing off the walls. He walked over to the table, his movements slow and deliberate, and set down the large box he was carrying. He let out a deep sigh, feeling the weight of his exhaustion. He wiped the sweat from his face, his hands moving slowly across his forehead. He sat up, his eyes fixed on the door, a small smile playing on his lips. Then, his gaze shifted to his gloves, still clutched in his hands. He began to remove them, his fingers fumbling slightly as he pulled them off. His hands felt numb and free, the sensation a welcome relief after the intense fight. Next, he took out his mouthguard, his teeth feeling strange and exposed without it. He let out a laugh, the sound echoing off the walls. "Ah ha 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 ha," he chuckled, his eyes shining with amusement. "This is fun, this is life," he said, his voice filled with joy. C-44. Chapter 44. The Aftermath. A door knock woke Damon up from his short nap, jolting him back to reality. He cleared his throat, gathering himself as he sat up. "Ah, fuck," he muttered, feeling the adrenaline wear off and the pain of the punches setting in. He slowly got up from the table, his muscles aching as he walked towards the door. He opened the door to find a man in a black uniform standing in the hallway. It was the same guy who had led him to the arena for the weigh-in. "Mr. Cross, congratulations on your debut," the man said, his voice firm and professional. Damon scratched his head, still trying to shake off the sleep. "Thanks," he replied, his voice gruff from disuse. The man smiled slightly. "Well, I'm here to lead you to the shower locker room. You must be eager to clean up after that intense fight. Damon couldn't help but look down at himself, taking in his sweat-stained clothes and the bruises already forming on his skin. He sniffed, wincing at his own smell. He knew he needed a shower badly. Okay. Wait here, he said, turning back into the room to grab his clothes. He emerged a moment later, his gear in hand. All right, lead the way, he said, following the man out of the room and into the hallway. As they walked, Damon's eyes took in the unfamiliar surroundings. The hallway was long and narrow, with doors leading off to either side. The man in black led him to a door at the far end, which he pushed open with a nod. Locker room showers, he said. You'll find everything you need in there. Damon nodded, stepping inside as the man turned to leave. The door closed behind him, and he was alone once more. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his exhaustion. He found the showers, a row of stalls lined up against the wall. He walked in, placing his clothes on the bench, and began undressing, starting with the shorts. He took out the cup and rolled up the clothes in one bundle, then headed into the shower. As he opened the water, it ran down his battered body, soothing his muscles. First win, he mumbled to himself, a small smile on his face. He closed his eyes, letting the water wash over him, and began to wash himself gently, careful not to hurt his bruises. The warm water felt good on his skin, relaxing his muscles and calming his mind. He stood there for 30 minutes, enjoying the sensation of the water and the quiet of the locker room. Finally, he turned off the water and pulled a towel from the rack, drying himself carefully. He wrapped the towel around his waist and got out of the shower, looking around the locker room. That's when he saw a plastic bag next to his clothes, with a note attached to it. He walked over and opened the bag, finding a set of clean clothes inside. He also saw a paper with a message. Congratulations on your win, keep up the good work and your rewards will be better. He smiled, feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment. He read the rest of the note, his eyes scanning the page. Go to the office to get your pay, it said. Damon's smile grew even wider as he read the words. He felt a sense of excitement and anticipation at the prospect of receiving his payment. He took off the towel and began dressing in the clean clothes, feeling the soft fabric against his skin. The clothes were a bit bigger than he was used to, but they were good enough. He noticed that they had Battle Extreme written on them, so he assumed they must be merchandise from the organization. He took the shorts and cup from the shower and stuffed them into the plastic bag, tying it up neatly. Then, he walked back to his room, the plastic bag in hand. He entered the room and placed the plastic bag into the box, leaving it there. I hope they don't lock it, he muttered to himself, wondering if his belongings would be safe. He took a deep breath, feeling the exhaustion start to creep back in. He knew he needed to go to the office and collect his pay, but he just wanted to rest. Damon forced himself to move, his legs feeling heavy with exhaustion. He wandered around the building, looking for a staff member to ask where the office was. He walked down a long hallway, his footsteps echoing off the walls. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a bright glow, making him squint. After a few minutes of walking, he saw a staff member standing at a desk, typing away on a computer. Damon approached him, clearing his throat to get his attention. Excuse me, he said, trying to sound clear and concise. Can you tell me where the office is? The staff member looked up, a friendly smile on his face. Ah, yeah, the office is just down that way, he said, pointing down a nearby hallway. You can't miss it. Just look for the sign that says, office. Damon nodded, thanking him, and set off in the direction he had been pointed. He walked for a few minutes, his eyes scanning the doors for the right one. Finally, he saw it, a door with a simple sign that read, office. Damon was surprised by how easily he found the office. At Nobleman at. He had expected a long search, but instead, he was pointed in the right direction and found it quickly. He wondered if the building only had one office, or if the office was just a well-known location. He stood in front of the door, his hand hesitating for a moment before knocking. Knock, knock. The sound echoed through the hallway, and a deep voice boomed from inside. Come in, it said. Damon took a deep breath, turned the handle, and pushed the door open. C-45. Chapter 45. Why do you fight? Damon stepped inside, and his ears picked up the sound of people talking. He expected to see a room full of staff members, but instead, he only saw one person sitting behind a desk. As he looked closer, he realized it was the same man they called Mr. Steele. Damon's eyes scanned the room, trying to find the source of the sound. That's when he saw it. A flat-screen TV mounted on the wall, showing a MMA match. The commentary filled the room, and Damon's eyes widened as he recognized the cage. It was the same one he had fought in just hours before. He took a step closer to the TV, his eyes fixed on the screen. The crowd was cheering, and the commentators were analyzing the fighters' moves. Damon noticed that the crowd seemed bigger than before, and he wondered if the crowd had started to fill up after his fight since his was only an opening fight. Mr. Steele looked up from his desk, catching Damon's gaze. He smiled and nodded, his eyes returning to the screen. Mr. Steele's voice broke the silence, his words unexpected. "Isn't it beautiful?" he said, his eyes still fixed on the screen. Damon thought he had misheard, so he looked at Mr. Steele, seeking clarification. "Sorry, sir, I didn't catch that," he replied, his voice a bit louder than a whisper. Mr. Steele stood up, his movements deliberate. He placed his hands on the table, his fingers splayed wide. "I meant, isn't it beautiful?" he repeated, his eyes locking onto Damon's. The sport, for one who doesn't know martial arts, this scene would just be sweaty men busy punching each other like barbarians. He paused, his gaze intense. Damon was about to respond, but Mr. Steele continued, his words flowing like a river. "But when you know what they're doing, you understand the beauty of it. While they may not be as skilled as professional fighters, their hunger to win and dominate is what increases the excitement of the fight. Their dedication to the art of fighting." Mr. Steele's voice was low and smooth, his words painting a picture in Damon's mind. He looked back at the screen, the fighters, movements taking on a new meaning. At Nobleman at. The sound of their heavy breathing, the sweat dripping from their bodies, the determination in their eyes, it all came together to create a beautiful symphony of martial arts. The room was silent, the only sound the commentary from the TV. Damon felt a sense of understanding wash over him, as if he was seeing the sport for the first time. Mr. Steele's words had given him a new perspective, one that appreciated the beauty in the brutality. "Tell me, Damon, why do you fight?" Mr. Steele's voice sounded, breaking the silence. But instead of an immediate response, silence followed as Damon tried to think of an answer. He opened his mouth to speak, "Because my mo," but was cut off by Mr. Steele's raised hand. "Wrong. I said why are you fighting, I didn't say what you were fighting for." "Similar but very different," Mr. Steele said, moving around the desk and leaning on it. He picked up the remote and turned off the TV, plunging the room into an uncomfortable silence. Damon's mind went blank as he tried to think of an answer. Why did he fight? He did it because he needed money, but was that not a reason? Mr. Steele's words echoed in his mind, similar but very different. Mr. Steele broke the silence, his voice low and gentle. "Maybe you don't know your reason yet." Damon's eyes snapped up, and he interrupted, "Because I want to be champion." But his answer didn't move Mr. Steele, who raised an eyebrow. "Is that it? So if I give you the belt now, that's it, no reason to fight?" Mr. Steele's words hung in the air, challenging Damon's motivations. Damon felt a surge of uncertainty, his mind racing to find a satisfying answer. But none came. The room remained silent, the only sound the soft hum of the air conditioning. Damon's eyes locked onto Mr. Steele's, searching for a hint of what he was looking for. But Mr. Steele's expression remained neutral, his eyes piercing but unreadable. Mr. Steele's smile grew wider as he spoke. "You know, this is the reason I let Jake pass on without any extended help and let him go to the UFA." Damon's mind flashed to Joey's brother, and he wondered what Mr. Steele saw in Jake that he didn't see in him. "He's a hell of a kid in the cage, and from what I've seen from you, you have the potential, Mr. Steele continued, his eyes narrowing slightly. But his reason was taking care of his brother, that's it. Commendable, and nothing wrong with it. But it's not what I'm looking for. Mr. Steele paused, his gaze intensifying. "Even if you're not what I want at the end of the day, if you've got talent like you do, I won't hinder your path. Like Jake Morales, your talent will be shown if you have it. But tell me, why do you fight?" Damon's mind went blank as he searched for an answer. He thought for what felt like an eternity, but even he wasn't satisfied with the reasons he came up with. "Do I enjoy fighting?" The thought echoed in his mind, and he couldn't shake off the feeling that it was true. "I feel happy when I fight, does that mean I love it and enjoy it?" Damon's thoughts swirled in a vortex of confusion. He couldn't help but want to deny it. Maybe it was because his father used to abuse him, Maybe he didn't want to admit he liked fighting because it would mean he enjoyed getting abused. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, and he pushed it away, unsure of how to confront it. Mr. Steele's eyes never left his face, waiting for an answer that Damon wasn't sure he had. Or maybe an answer Damon didn't want to believe. C-46. Chapter 46. The Offer. Damon raised his head, his eyes locking onto Mr. Steele's with a mix of uncertainty and curiosity. I don't know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Steele's smile grew wider, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he nodded knowingly. That's fine, Mr. Steele said, his voice low and soothing, like a gentle breeze on a summer day. I have an offer for you. He walked towards the table, his movements deliberate and calm, like a predator stalking its prey. Damon's eyes followed him, wondering what could be the offer that Mr. Steele was about to present. You know, even with all that talent, your skills are still not par, Mr. Steele said, his voice measured and calculated. Today's knockout could be called a fluke. So here's what I'm going to do. He paused, his gaze intensifying, like a laser beam focusing on its target. From what I've seen, you're good, but I need convincing. I want you to win your next 3 fights. Damon's eyes widened, his mind racing with the implications. 3 fights. That was a tall order, especially considering his last fight was a knockout. But Mr. Steele's confidence was infectious, and Damon found himself wanting to believe. And I will make sure you get the best training, Mr. Steele continued, his voice dripping with conviction. I'll bring in the top coaches, the best sparring partners. You'll have everything you need to succeed. He paused, his eyes glinting with determination. You'll be a contender, Damon. A real contender. Damon couldn't believe it. This was an opportunity of a lifetime, one that he couldn't afford to pass up. But why was Mr. Steele doing this for him? What did he want in return? Why? Damon asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Steele ignored his question, his expression unreadable. Not only will I do that, I'll make sure you get paid for your fights. You'll be well taken care of. He pulled an envelope from his suit pocket and held it out to Damon. The white envelope seemed to glow in the dim light of the office, its edges crisp and sharp. Damon looked at Mr. Steele's hand, his eyes fixed on the envelope. He felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervousness. What did Mr. Steele want from him? He hesitated for a moment, then reached out and took the envelope, his heart pounding in his chest. There's the money for your fight, tonight, Mr. Steele said, his voice firm and matter of fact. Make sure you spend it well, you won't get any for your next 3. The event will be here in Stockton for the next 4 shows. He turned to sit back in his chair, his movements smooth and deliberate. Damon looked down at the envelope in his hand, feeling the weight of the cash inside. He then looked up at Mr. Steele, his eyes locking onto his. Thank you, he said, his voice sincere. I'll make sure to win. Mr. Steele's expression remained neutral, his eyes fixed on Damon's. I hope so, he said, his voice low and even. Now go on. I have matches to watch, and I'm sure you want to leave and go home. He waved his hand dismissively, his fingers spread wide. Damon nodded, feeling a sense of gratitude towards Mr. Steele. He thanked him once more, his voice a little louder this time. Thank you, sir. He turned to leave, his footsteps echoing in the quiet office. He reached the door, grasped the handle, and pulled it open. At Nobleman at. The bright lights of the hallway spilled in, illuminating the dim office. Damon stepped out into the hallway, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs. He looked down at the envelope in his hand, feeling a sense of determination. He was going to win, no matter what it took. He started walking down the hallway, his footsteps echoing off the walls. He passed by the rows of seats, the empty chairs seeming to stretch on forever. He walked back to his room, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. Thankfully, the door wasn't locked yet, and he slipped inside, closing it behind him. He took a deep breath, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. He went back to his room, thankfully it wasn't locked yet, and entered, taking the box with his fighting kit. He lifted the lid, revealing his gear, neatly arranged and organized. His gloves, hand wraps, mouthguard, and shorts were all packed neatly inside. He ran his hand over the gear, feeling a sense of familiarity and comfort. Leaving the room, he walked out of the building, into the warm glow of the golden hour. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over everything. He smiled to himself, thinking about the offer Mr. Steel had made. He walked across the parking. He couldn't help but mumble to himself, "I'll run through them." He felt a surge of determination and confidence. He was going to win those fights, no matter what it took. He settled into the worn leather seat of the cab, the soft creaking of the cushions enveloping him in a sense of familiarity. "To the Sunset Motel," he said, his voice firm and clear, as he gazed out the window at the passing cityscape. The drive took its time, the cab crawling through the evening traffic like a slow-moving beast. Damon decided to open up his status interface to pass some time. He focused his mind, and a holographic display flickered to life in front of him. The interface materialized, its sleek lines and minimalist design a testament to its advanced technology. "Congratulations for completing the quest." The first notification read. He smiled, a sense of pride and accomplishment washing over him like a warm wave. A dramatic finish, reward, striking move, and proficiency feature. He grinned, feeling a surge of excitement at the new abilities and upgrades. He spent the next few minutes scrolling through the interface, taking in the details of his reward. The cab ride seemed shorter now, his attention focused on the holographic display. The cab driver's voice broke the silence. "We're arriving at the Sunset Motel, sir." Damon nodded, his eyes still fixed on the interface. He closed the interface, the holographic display flickering out of existence, and looked up at the motel's neon-broken sign, its bright colors glowing like a beacon in the evening light. C-47. Chapter 47. New Move and Proficiency Feature. The morning light hit the motel, casting a warm glow over the parking lot and rooms. Aoife could be seen walking towards a room, carrying a cart filled with cleaning materials. Her bright yellow uniform stood out against the muted colors of the motel. She moved with a quiet efficiency, her dark hair tied back in a neat ponytail. In the parking lot, a young man could be seen practicing martial arts. He was shirtless, his muscular torso glistening with sweat. His movements were fluid and precise, his kicks flying through the air with a soft whooshing sound. His feet bare, he stood on the rough asphalt, his eyes fixed intently on some point in front of him. The sound of birds chirping, the gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, causing the motel's neon sign to creak softly. Aoife inserted her key card into the door lock and pushed the cart inside. She began to tidy up the room, her movements quick and efficient. Damon's focus was intense as he practiced the striking move he had won from the quest. Last night's massage had piqued his interest, and he was determined to master the technique. Striking move. Question mark kick. It is a complex maneuver that requires precision and power. A question mark kick is a deceptive martial arts technique that starts like a roundhouse kick, leading the opponent to expect a body or leg strike. Midway through the motion, the kicker subtly pulls the leg back and then quickly redirects it upward in a sweeping arc, resembling the shape of a question mark. This sudden change in direction targets the opponent's head or face, making the kick difficult to anticipate or block, and is often used to catch opponents off guard. Damon's legs trembled slightly as he attempted the question mark kick. He started with a roundhouse motion, his foot swinging in a wide arc. But midway through, he struggled to pull his leg back and redirect it upward. His movements were jerky and awkward, lacking the fluidity and precision required for the technique. His foot wobbled as he tried to sweep it upward, the motion more like a sloppy hook kick than a smooth, arcing question mark. Damon's eyes narrowed in concentration, his face scrunched up in effort. He could feel the muscles in his legs straining, his balance wavering. The sound of his foot swooshing through the air was more like a dull thud than a sharp whoosh. Damon's body leaned forward, his arms flailing slightly as he tried to compensate for his loss of balance. He stumbled, his foot thudding against the asphalt with a loud smack. Damon winced, his face flushing with frustration. He knew he was far from mastering the move. The proficiency display in front of him seemed to mock him, the 10% progress a harsh reminder of how much work lay ahead. He took a deep breath, his eyes fixed intently on the display. He would get this move down, no matter how long it took. Damon's chest heaved with exertion, his muscles trembling with fatigue. But he refused to give up, his determination burning brighter with each failed attempt. His eyes scanned the proficiency display. It wasn't just the question mark kick. Every move he had learned was listed, from basic punches to basic kicks. The exchanged move had a percentage next to it, tracking his progress. It was exactly what he needed to take his training to the next level. He stopped practicing and took a deep breath, wiping the sweat from his forehead. He picked up his shirt and used it to dry his chest and back. Then, he grabbed the 5-liter water bottle and took a long swig, feeling the cool liquid refresh his parched throat. Last night, he noticed a new quest had appeared. Win your 3 upcoming matches. Reward. SYRUM, Potion Shop Access. There was no punishment listed, but Damon knew that losing wasn't an option. He had to win those matches. The sun beat down on him, warming his skin. The sound of birds chirping and traffic humming in the distance filled the air. Damon's muscles ached, but he felt invigorated. Damon pushed open the creaky door and stepped into the room, the familiar scent of worn furniture and stale air enveloping him. His mom, Aoife, sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes fixed on him as he entered. She wore her usual attire, a faded yellow blouse with tiny white flowers and a pair of worn jeans, her dark hair tied back in a neat ponytail. At Nobleman at. Damon, are you done with your training? Didn't you say we should leave early for the shops? She asked, her voice gentle but laced with a hint of excitement. Damon nodded, dropping his martial arts gear on the floor with a soft thud. Yes, I'm done, I'll be quick and join you. He grabbed the fresh clothes he had laid out earlier, the Battle Extreme merchandise he had won, and headed to the bathroom. The cool tiles felt refreshing under his feet as he stepped inside. Inside, he began to undress further, pulling off his sweat-drenched pants and shorts, revealing his naked body. He winced slightly as he moved, his muscles aching from the physical toll of his martial arts journey. As he stood under the shower, Damon gazed at his reflection in the mirror. His face was a map of bruises, the purple and blue marks a proof to the intense training and matches he had endured. But he was recovering slowly, his body repairing the damage. His mind, however, was elsewhere. Today, he and his mom were going to buy new clothes. They had been living in their old clothes for too long, reminders of their homeless days. Damon had a few new shirts and pants, gifts from Joey and BE, but his mom deserved some new things too. The warm water continued to cascade down his skin, refreshing him, as he thought about the day ahead. C-48. Chapter 48. A New Wardrobe. Damon walked alongside his mom, Aoife, as they made their way to the thrift store Joey had recommended. The sun cast a warm glow over the sidewalk, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers. They passed by a small cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting out into the street. As they walked, Damon couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and gratitude. The envelope from Mr. Steele had contained a generous sum of $600, which would go a long way in helping them get back on their feet. He had told his mom about it last night, and they had agreed to use some of it to buy new clothes. The thrift store came into view, its faded sign creaking gently in the breeze. Aoife pushed open the door, and they stepped inside. The store was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of old clothes and fabric softener. Rows of racks stretched out before them, packed tightly with garments of every color and style. Damon's eyes widened as he scanned the racks, overwhelmed by the sheer amount of choices. He hadn't been in a clothing store since they fled Ireland, and the experience felt foreign yet exciting. Aoife smiled and took his hand, leading him deeper into the store. As they browsed, Damon's fingers trailed over the fabrics, feeling the softness of cotton, the smoothness of polyester, and the roughness of denim. Damon watched as his mother's eyes lingered on a dress, her gaze softening as she reached out to touch the fabric. At Nobleman at. He encouraged her. Come on, Mom, try it on. There's a fitting room, and it's only. He checked the price tag, his eyes widening in surprise. $10. He exclaimed, handing her the dress. If it fits or you like it, we can take it, he said, gently pushing her towards the changing room. As his mother disappeared into the fitting room, Damon continued browsing the racks, his fingers trailing over the garments. He selected a few shirts and pants, carefully checking the sizes to ensure they would fit. He also picked out a pair of shoes, his eyes scanning the store to see if they had any more deals like this. The prices were astonishingly low, and Damon couldn't help but wonder if the clothes were genuine. He knew they weren't brand new, but they looked barely used. Most of the items were in perfect condition, with no visible stains or tears. The quality was decent, and Damon was impressed by the thrift store's selection. He wandered over to the changing room, waiting for his mother to emerge. The air was thick with the scent of fabric softener and the faint hint of perfume. Damon heard the sound of clothes rustling, followed by the soft murmur of his mother's voice. Damon, come see. He pushed open the curtain, and his mother twirled in front of the mirror, the dress fluttering around her knees. The color brought out the warmth in her skin, and her eyes sparkled with delight. What do you think? She asked, her voice filled with excitement. Damon smiled, taking in the sight of his mother in the dress. You look beautiful, Mom, he said, his voice sincere. We should get it. His mother beamed, and Damon helped her out of the dress, carefully hanging it back on the rack. They continued shopping, their arms growing laden with bags and bundles of clothes. The thrill of the hunt was exhilarating, and Damon felt grateful for this small pleasure in their lives. As they finished shopping, Damon couldn't help but feel a sense of joy and contentment. Seeing his mother happy, wearing the dress they had found, brought a warmth to his heart. He admitted to himself that this feeling was better than winning any fight. As they approached the counter to pay, the cash register lady greeted them with a friendly smile. Damon's mother still wore the dress, and the lady didn't mind, as long as they were paying for it. The lady scanned the items, her fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. That'll be $278 please, she said, her voice cheerful. Damon handed over the cash, and the lady handed him the change. Oh, if you're interested in furniture or electronics, you can go to the store on the opposite side of the street, she said, pointing out the window. Same concept as this one, just for electronics. Damon's ears perked up at the mention of electronics. He had been thinking about finding a stove, maybe they could finally have their first home-cooked meal. He looked at the lady. Thank you, he said, his voice sincere. As they left the thrift store, Damon carried the plastic bags in each hand, the weight of their new clothes and shoes a tangible reminder of their successful shopping trip. They walked towards the store the cashier had directed them to, the one that supposedly sold electronics. The sign above the door read, "Secondhand Electronics," and Damon felt a surge of excitement at the prospect of finding a stove. As they entered the store, they were immediately greeted by rows of old computers and monitors, their screens dark and uninviting. The air inside was surprisingly fresh. Damon looked around, his eyes scanning the shelves for any sign of stoves. But all he saw were electronics, no stoves in sight. Mom, I don't think they sell stoves here, he said, a wry smile spreading across his face. Aoife rolled her eyes good-naturedly. You haven't even asked the people working here yet. Come on, go on, ask. Damon scratched his head, feeling a bit silly for not thinking of that. He walked towards the counter, where a short man with a receding hairline looked up from behind the counter. Good morning, sir, Damon said, trying to sound confident. Morning, how may I help you? The man replied, his voice friendly. Damon asked, I was wondering if you had any stoves that I could buy. The man's face lit up with a wide smile. Oh, sure, come with me. He walked around the counter, Damon following close behind. They wove through the rows of electronics, Damon's eyes fixed on the man's back. Finally, they stopped in front of a large stove, one that looked like it belonged in a commercial kitchen. Damon's heart sank. He hadn't been looking for something this big, this expensive. And it would definitely need delivery. The man stood proudly beside the stove, a look of expectation on his face. Damon didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This was not what he had been hoping for. C-49. Chapter 49. A smaller stove. Damon shook his head. No, you misunderstood. This one's too big. I want a smaller one. He didn't want to pay for a large machine that would be a hassle to transport and install. The man's face fell. Ah, I see. Unfortunately, I don't think we have any of that, but I could ask in the back. Just wait for me at the counter. He scratched his bald head, looking apologetic. Damon returned to the counter, where his mom was waiting, her eyes inquiring. So, did you find it? She asked, her voice laced with skepticism. Damon smiled wryly. Yep, we found it, but it's a tad too big and probably expensive. He knew his mom would be concerned about the cost. I told you, Damon, we should stick to buying food. A stove is just too much expensive, she said, her voice rising in argument. Damon nodded understandingly. I know, Mom, but don't worry, the cashier said he'll check in the back. If they don't find it, I won't insist. He tried to reassure her, knowing she was worried about their limited budget. His mom didn't know he could buy ingredients on his system without needing money. Mere moments later, the man returned, a hint of a smile on his face. Okay, there's a small two-plate stove, he said, his voice laced with a sense of accomplishment. Damon's eyes lit up, and he turned to his mom, about to speak, but the man's next words caught him off guard. But there's a problem, the man added, his smile faltering. Damon's gaze snapped back to the man, his curiosity piqued. What's wrong? I thought you said you had it, he asked, a hint of confusion creeping into his voice. The man's expression turned wry, and he rubbed the back of his neck. Oh, we do. The problem is that the stove is a two-plate, but one side doesn't work, he admitted, his honesty surprising Damon. Damon's eyes narrowed, his mind weighing the pros and cons. A two-plate stove with one faulty side was better than nothing. The man's candor, however, was refreshing. Normally, salespeople wouldn't even mention the product's flaws, but this man's transparency put Damon at ease. Aoife nodded decisively. Okay, we'll take it. It's better than nothing. How much is it? She asked, her practicality taking over. The man smiled. It's only $20, since the stove still works perfectly fine besides the one side. He seemed pleased with himself for offering a good deal. Let me go take it, he said, disappearing into the back room once again. The lights overhead hummed steadily, casting a pale glow on the scene. Moments later, the man returned with a large box, its edges worn and faded. He opened it, revealing the small two-plate stove inside. He plugged it in, checking to make sure it worked, the faulty side notwithstanding. Damon and Aoife watched as the man expertly checked the stove, his hands moving with a practiced ease. Finally, he nodded, satisfied. Okay, that's it, he said, smiling at them. $20, please. Aoife handed over the cash, and the man handed her the box. Here you go, he said, his transaction complete. Damon took the box, feeling a sense of accomplishment. They had found a stove, imperfect as it was, and it was theirs for a mere $20. He smiled at his mom, who smiled back, her eyes shining with a sense of hope. Together, they left the store, the box clutched tightly in Damon's hands, the promise of home-cooked meals hanging in the air like a tantalizing prospect. As they left the store, Damon and his mom carried their purchases, the boxes and bags filled to the brim. They hailed a cab, the bright sunlight reflecting off the windshield as they settled in for the ride. The journey wasn't long, and they arrived at the motel quickly, the familiar sign creaking in the gentle breeze. But as they stepped out of the cab, the driver's eyes widened in surprise. You folks have a lot of stuff there, he said, his voice tinged with curiosity. That'll be extra, please. Damon's mom handed over the cash, and they began to unload the bags and boxes. The plastic rustled and crinkled as they carried it all into the motel room, at Novelban at. As they walked in, the eyes of the other motel residents followed them, their gazes filled with a mix of curiosity and envy. Everyone here was struggling financially, and it was rare to see someone come back with so many bags and boxes. Damon and his mom didn't notice the stares, too focused on getting everything inside. They stacked the boxes and bags in the corner of the room, the motel's worn carpet creaking beneath their feet. Finally, they finished, the room looking like a treasure trove of secondhand goodies. Damon's mom smiled, her eyes shining with satisfaction. Let's get organized, she said, her voice filled with a sense of purpose. He nodded, already starting to unpack the boxes. The day was still long, but they had accomplished so much already. Damon realized they'll need some ingredients. Mom, I'll be back. We forgot the ingredients. I'll go to a nearby store. He rushed out of the motel room, his mom's voice calling after him. Damon, wait, but he was already gone, disappearing around the corner. Aoife shook her head, chuckling to herself. You don't even know what to buy, she muttered, returning to fold the clothes they had purchased. But Damon didn't need to go far. He just went around the corner and opened his system interface shop. The familiar screen glowed in front of him, and he scrolled through the options. He felt a little weird deciding their menu, but he picked out some ingredients he thought were necessary. He had never cooked before, so he had no idea what to buy. But he figured meat was a good place to start, and he bought 2 pieces, each costing 1 system coin. Coins. 122. Looking at his coins, he knew he could buy ingredients for a good amount of time. He had 122 coins left, and each week, he earned more from his matches and daily training challenges. In the last 5 months, he had made $150, which had been spent on water, bananas, bread, and other essentials. But now, with his system coins, he could buy ingredients without worrying about the cost. Damon closed the interface, feeling a sense of excitement. He couldn't wait to see what his mom would make with the ingredients he had bought. He headed back to the motel room, eager to start cooking. C50. Chapter 50. A simple meal. Aoife stood at the small stove, expertly cooking the steak on the one working plate. The sizzling sound filled the room, accompanied by a savory aroma that made their mouths water. Damon watched as his mom worked, the smell of cooking meat and spices filling the air. The rice, cooked earlier, sat in a separate pot, its fluffy texture a testament to Aoife's culinary skills. Damon had helped with the simple tasks, like washing the rice and stirring it occasionally. As they worked, the motel room's worn carpet and faded curtains seemed less noticeable. The room was filled with the smell of cooking meat and steaming rice, teasing their taste buds and building their anticipation. Finally, Aoife placed the finished steak on a plate, alongside the cooked rice. Aoife took the plate and walked towards Damon. Damon looked up at his mother in confusion, wondering why she was staring at him like that. He took the plate from her, his hands wrapping around the warm plate. He grabbed the spoon. As he scooped up the first bite, he was about to put it to his mouth when he looked up. He saw his mother staring at him, a smile spreading across her face. Aoife saw Damon stop, his spoon hovering in midair, and urged him on. "Come on, eat up," she said, her voice soft and encouraging. Damon shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. He went back to eating, his spoon moving towards his mouth. He took the first bite, the tender steak touching his tongue. The flavors exploded in his mouth, the savory taste of the meat and the slight char from the pan. He chewed slowly, savoring the taste. It was nothing he had ever tasted before. The steak was tender, the texture melting in his mouth. He swallowed, his eyes widening in surprise. He took another bite, the flavors dancing on his tongue. The steak was cooked to perfection, the outside slightly crispy, the inside juicy and tender. The rice was fluffy, the grains separate and soft. "Is it good?" Aoife asked, her warm smile spreading across her face. Her eyes sparkled with a hint of mischief, and her voice was filled with a gentle eagerness. Damon laughed at his mother's antics, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Of course, it's delicious, Mom," he said, his voice teasing. "Come on, eat your food before it becomes cold." As he spoke, he gestured to the plate in front of her, the steaming rice and perfectly cooked steak inviting. The aroma of the food wafted up, savory and enticing. Deep down, Damon understood his mother's eagerness. Although he had been young when they left Ireland to escape his father's abuse, he remembered her passion for cooking. He recalled how she would spend hours in the kitchen, her face flushed with happiness, as she prepared meals for their family. He remembered how she would beam with pride when people ate her food, her eyes shining with a sense of satisfaction. It was as if cooking brought her joy, and sharing that joy with others made it even more special. Added Nobleman at. But he also remembered how her smile faded, replaced by a look of fear and pain, when Taro put his hands on her. The man wasn't even worth calling father. Damon's grip on his spoon tightened as he recalled the sound of her cries, muffled but still audible, even as she continued cooking. Her eyes would well up with tears, but she never stopped, never faltered, as if cooking was her escape. But now, since he'd started fighting, training in MMA, Damon couldn't help but wish he had the scum in front of him. He'd bash his face 1,000 times on the concrete, watch his blood splatter, and feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. The thought made his jaw clench, his eyes narrowing. "Damon, are you okay?" Aoife asked, concern etched on her face. She saw Damon's spoon hovering above his plate, his food untouched. She stretched out her hand, reaching for his arm. Damon hid his tension with a forced smile. "No, it's fine, I'm just thinking about my training." He lied, the words coming easier now. He looked down, avoiding her gaze. Aoife nodded, her expression softening. "You and your training, I should lock you in here," she joked, trying to lighten the mood. Her voice was warm, teasing, and it worked. Damon laughed, the sound genuine, his tension easing. He took another bite of his food, the flavors dancing on his tongue, but his mind still lingered on the past, on the memories he wished he could erase. As they continued their dinner, enjoying each other's company, they chatted and laughed, savoring the warmth of the moment. The room was cozy. They finished dinner, satisfied and content. After dinner, they cleaned up, the room growing hotter without air conditioning. They took turns taking a shower, the single shower in the motel room a reminder of their simple circumstances. The water was warm, refreshing, and soothing, washing away the fatigue of the day. With that done, they each got into their single beds, the beds creaking softly as they settled in. "Good night, Mom," Damon said, his voice gentle, closing his eyes. His eyelids felt heavy, his body relaxed. "Good night," she replied, her voice sounded tired, but peaceful. Her words were soft, barely above a whisper, as if she didn't want to break the tranquility of the moment. The night fell, the moon shining brightly outside, casting a silver glow through the window. The room grew darker, the shadows deepening, but the atmosphere remained calm and serene. A lot of people don't get what they want, but a lot do. Life is unpredictable, and the future is uncertain. No one can claim to know what's going to happen next. Damon's desire to meet his father is strong, but will it happen? Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Maybe they'll meet and Damon will finally get the answers he's been searching for. But the real question isn't about when or how they'll meet. It's not even about why Damon wants to meet him. The real question is about courage. Will Damon have the guts to do what he wants to do? Will he be brave enough to face his father and confront the emotions he's been carrying around for so long? C51. Chapter 51. Falling back into routine. And days and weeks passed like that, each one blending into the next. Damon finally got the weekly training quest he had been waiting for from the system, and he threw himself into his training, preparing for his upcoming fight. He spent hours in the parking lot of the motel, sweating and pushing himself to his limits. He practiced his kicks and punches, his movements swift and precise. He ran laps around the parking lot, his feet pounding the asphalt. He trained every day, his body aching as he pushed himself to get stronger and faster. One of the moves he was determined to master was the question mark kick. He practiced it over and over in the parking lot, his legs swinging through the air. But his proficiency was slow in coming. He didn't think it would be a good idea to use it in his fight when it was stuck on 14%, not yet. As the days turned into weeks, they fell into a familiar routine. Damon woke up every morning to train in the parking lot, his muscles aching as he pushed himself to get stronger and faster. Aoife spent her days cleaning the motel rooms, her hands moving as she made the beds and changed the sheets. The parking lot became a comfortable training ground, a sense of normalcy in their once chaotic lives. Damon moved through his training with ease, his movements practiced and familiar. Aoife watched him from the motel room window, her eyes shining with encouragement. Through the weeks, Damon had to visit the medical center for tests, which were required before any fight. He sat in the waiting room, flipping through magazines, waiting for his name to be called. When it was, he stood up and walked to the examination room, his feet echoing off the walls. The doctor greeted him with a smile and began the examination, checking his blood pressure, heart rate, and reflexes. Damon answered the doctor's questions, his voice clear and strong. After the examination, the doctor sent him for blood work and a urine test. Damon sat in the lab, watching as the nurse drew his blood with a quick jab of the needle. He winced slightly, but it was over soon. Wheels later, when the results came back, Damon was relieved to see that everything was clean. He had managed to keep his weight stable at 125 despite Aoife's good cooking. He had been worried about that, but his discipline had paid off. But despite his progress, Damon had to admit that training alone had become harder. It was hard to progress when he couldn't test his theories on someone or have competition. This was one of the reasons he was determined even more to win his next fight and get Mr. Steele's backing, and get a team and coaches. He wanted to be able to train with others, to push himself to his limits, and to have the support of a team behind him. This time he knew his opponent's name, Mark Henderson. But that was all he knew. Damon had wished for more information, but now he realized it was useless without context. He didn't know Mark's fighting style, his strengths or weaknesses, or anything about his experience. Damon thought about how different it would be if he had a team behind him. They would be studying Mark's every move, analyzing his techniques, and finding ways to exploit his weaknesses. They would be watching tapes of Mark's fights, learning his patterns and habits. But Damon didn't have that luxury. He was alone, with only his own skills and experience to rely on. And he knew that Mark's team, if he had one, was probably doing the same thing, studying Damon's one recorded match, looking for ways to take him down. Damon felt determined. He couldn't mess up this chance with Mr. Steele. He had to win, no matter what. At Nobleman at. He thought about all the hours he had spent training, all the sweat and blood he had put into this. He couldn't let it all be for nothing. Damon's mind was focused, his eyes fixed on the prize. He would do whatever it took to win, to make sure he didn't disappoint Mr. Steele or himself. He was ready for Mark Henderson, ready to face whatever he threw his way. Now that he had only 1 week left before his match, Damon pushed himself harder than ever before. He trained relentlessly, pouring all his energy into his preparations. The fight would remain in the same venue, so there wasn't a lot of change. But he knew he had to give it his all if he wanted to win. As the days passed, Damon's training started to decrease. He didn't want to overdo it and risk injuring himself just before the fight. He had to pace himself, make sure he was fresh and ready for the big day. He washed his kit, making sure everything was clean and ready for the fight. He laid out his clothes, his gloves, and his mouthguard, double-checking that he had everything he needed. On the eve of the fight, Damon didn't do any strenuous exercises. He just stretched his body, loosening his muscles and getting his blood flowing. He took a break, avoiding any heavy movements that might tire him out. Damon felt ready and focused for the fight. He had prepared well and now trusted his skills. His body was relaxed, muscles calm, and he was confident. With a clear mind and a steady breath, Damon was in the zone. He had visualized this moment, trained for it, and was now ready to execute. Damon snuggled under the blankets, feeling the softness of the bed beneath him. He closed his eyes, his mind quiet and focused. He took a deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs, and then slowly released it. As he drifted off to sleep, Damon felt a sense of calm wash over him. Mark Henderson, It's Your Funeral. C-52. Chapter 52, The Final Showdown. Damon got out of the cab, standing in front of the community hall. The bright sunlight hit him, casting a warm light over the scene. He stretched his arms, feeling the weight of his kit in the plastic bag slung over his shoulder. He paid the driver, handing over the fare with a nod of thanks. The driver took the money, his eyes flicking to the plastic bag before returning to the road. Damon turned to face the community hall, his eyes scanning the building. He walked towards the entrance, his feet echoing off the pavement. The guards stood at the door, their eyes watchful and alert. They patted him down, their hands moving quickly and efficiently over his body. Damon stood still, his arms raised as the guards checked him for any prohibited items. He felt a sense of calm wash over him, his focus fixed on the fight ahead. He got to his room, the same room he had been in before, and began to prepare for the way in. He placed the plastic bag containing his kit on the table and started to change into his shorts. He took off his pants and shirt, and then slipped on the shorts. He had noticed last time that fighters were not wearing underwear, so he followed suit. The shorts felt lightweight and comfortable against his skin. Damon stood in front of the mirror, checking his reflection. He looked focused, his eyes fixed on the task ahead. He took a deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs, and then exhaled slowly. A knock came at the door, and Damon got up to follow the guy who had knocked. He didn't really need to follow him, since he still remembered the direction to the way-in room from last time. But he followed anyway, his feet carrying him down the familiar hallway. As he walked, the sound of murmured conversations and shuffling feet filled the air. The smell of sweat and adrenaline wafted through the corridor, mingling with the scent of freshly cleaned floors. Damon stood in front of a door, waiting for his turn to enter. He could hear the sound of voices inside, the rustling of papers, and the beeping of the scale. Then, he heard it. 123 for Mark Henderson, he makes weight. The voice was loud and clear, and it was followed by a small applause. At it nobleman at. The clapping was brief, but it was enough to make Damon's heart beat just a little bit faster. Damon took a deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs, and walked into the room. He stepped through the doorway, his eyes scanning the space, and caught a glimpse of his opponent. Just like the last one, Mark Henderson was short, standing at least a head shorter than Damon. Damon's gaze lingered on his opponent for a brief moment, taking in the sight of him. Mark was stocky, with a compact build, and his eyes seemed fixed intently on Damon. He stepped onto the platform, feeling the cool surface beneath his feet. Damon stepped onto the scale, his feet making a slight tapping sound on the metal surface. He looked out at the crowd, his eyes scanning the room with a hint of confidence. The faces in the crowd were a blur, but he could sense their gaze upon him. He flexed his muscles, his skinny arms and legs tensing slightly as he did so. His muscles were visible, even though he wasn't bulky, and he felt a sense of pride in his lean physique. The man operating the scale adjusted the weights, his hands moving with precision as he did his job. He looked up at Damon, his expression neutral, and then turned to the guy holding the mic. 125, he said, his voice clear and loud. The guy with the mic repeated the number, his voice booming across the room. 125 for Damon Cross, he makes weight. Damon stepped down from the scale, his feet making a soft thud on the floor. He turned and walked back towards the door, his eyes fixed on the exit. As he walked, he could feel the eyes of the crowd upon him, their gaze following him as he moved. He didn't look back, keeping his focus on the door ahead. He pushed through the door and out into the hallway, the sounds of the crowd fading behind him. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs, and began to make his way back to his room. As he exited the hallway, Damon bumped into Mr. Steele, who was standing with his arms crossed, eyeing him up and down. Good luck out there, Mr. Steele said, his voice firm but encouraging. I hope you bring your best. Mr. Steele patted Damon on the shoulder, his hand making a soft thudding sound on Damon's skin. Damon nodded, feeling a sense of determination wash over him. He continued walking, his feet carrying him back to his room. As he entered his room, Damon sat down on the bench, his eyes fixed on his reflection in the mirror. He took a deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs, and then exhaled slowly. He looked at himself, taking in the sight of his lean physique, his focused eyes, and his determined expression. It's time, he said to himself, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air, a simple statement of fact. It was time to put everything on the line, time to give it his all, time to show everyone what he was capable of. Damon's gaze lingered on his reflection for a moment longer, and then he stood up, his movements swift and decisive. He began to dress, his hands moving quickly and efficiently as he put on his gear. Damon wrapped his hands with the gloves, the soft padding enveloping his fingers as he secured them tightly. He then slipped on the fighting shorts, the lightweight material hugging his legs snugly. Finally, he inserted the mouthguard, the plastic molding to his teeth as he bit down on it, ready to absorb any impact. As he finished preparing, Damon took a moment to survey himself in the mirror. His eyes narrowed, his gaze intense, as he checked his gear. The gloves were secure, the shorts were in place, and the mouthguard was fitted perfectly. Quest issued. Quest. Win the match. Reward. 10 coins. C53. Chapter 53. Arrogance. The small hall was packed, every seat taken, and people standing in the aisles. Unlike last time, when the first match had a sparse audience, today's event had drawn a much larger crowd. Whether it was due to Damon's match or the growing popularity of Battle Extreme, the result was the same. A buzzing, electric atmosphere that seemed to vibrate through every molecule of air. At Nobleman at. On the table, Michael Bosley spoke through the broadcast, his voice clear and confident, carrying to wherever the show was being streamed. Good afternoon, everyone, he said, his words accompanied by the sound of equipment and the murmur of the crowd. After weeks of waiting, we're finally here, another show of Battle Extreme. Last show, we had a spectacular card, and today isn't any different. Michael's partner, Daniel Green, smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Indeed, as Michael said, today's card is good, he echoed, his voice smooth and rich. And just like before, we're going to be opening this event with an interesting matchup. Before entering the cage, Damon was thoroughly checked and patted down by the officials, ensuring a fair and safe fight. As the music reached a crescendo, the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers, introducing Damon Cross. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, their voices echoing off the walls of the packed hall. Damon stepped into the cage, his eyes scanning the sea of faces as he made his way to the center. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs, and tried to calm his nerves. He knew that this fight was crucial, that losing would mean closing the door on the opportunity that had just opened for him. As he bounced around the canvas, his feet making soft thudding sounds on the mat, Damon focused on his breathing. He tried to clear his mind, to push aside the pressure and the doubts that crept in. He was ready for this, he had trained for this. The announcer's voice cut through the din once more, and introducing Mark Henderson. The crowd's cheers grew louder, their applause more intense, as Mark made his way to the cage. Mark's eyes locked onto Damon's, his gaze intense, his expression focused. His muscles were rippling beneath his skin as he moved. His eyes seemed to bore into Damon's very soul, as if sizing him up, searching for weaknesses. Daniel turned to Michael, his eyes inquiring, Michael, tell me your thoughts on the matchup. I feel you have more insight on this. Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. Indeed, I think it's a good one. In general, both fighters are new, to say the least. While Damon has only one fight under his belt, Mark has a few more, which provides an interesting dynamic. Michael paused, collecting his thoughts before continuing. Mark has some good wrestling and boxing skills, we've seen that in his previous fights. He's got a strong foundation, and he knows how to use it. On the other hand, we've seen Damon utilize his Muay Thai skills, but that's all we've seen from him so far. Maybe we'll learn something new today, maybe he's been working on some new techniques. Michael's eyes narrowed slightly, his gaze intense. I think what's going to be key in this fight is how well Damon can adapt to Mark's wrestling. If he can keep the fight standing, I think he's got a good chance. But if Mark can take him down, it could be a long night for Damon. Daniel nodded, his eyes locked on Michael's. That's a great point. And what about Mark's chances? Do you think he's got what it takes to win? Michael hesitated for a moment before responding. I think Mark's got a good shot. He's got experience, he's got skills, and he's got confidence. But, you never know what's going to happen in a fight. One punch, one kick, one mistake, and the whole thing can change. The camera zoomed in on Michael's face, his expression serious, his eyes intense, as he continued, it's going to be an interesting fight, that's for sure. Let's see what happens. As the camera panned back into the cage, both fighters were seen standing facing each other, listening intently to the referee's instructions. The referee, a tall, imposing figure with a stern expression, looked both fighters in the eye, his voice clear and authoritative. You may touch gloves if you want, he said, his gaze switching between Damon and Mark. Damon, his eyes fixed on Mark, stretched out his hand, his fist clenched, offering a traditional glove touch. But Mark, his expression unyielding, simply smirked and backed away, his eyes never leaving Damon's face. The crowd, sensing a hint of animosity, let out a collective, oh, their anticipation growing. The camera zoomed in on Mark's face, his smirk still plastered on his lips, his eyes gleaming with a hint of arrogance. Damon, on the other hand, simply shrugged his shoulders, his expression neutral, and backed away to his corner, his eyes never leaving Mark's face. The bell rang, its loud, metallic sound echoing through the hall, signaling the start of the fight. Damon, his eyes fixed intently on Mark, moved closer, his feet light on the canvas. He adopted his Muay Thai stance, his left foot forward, his right foot back, his weight evenly distributed between both legs. Damon glared at Mark, his eyes narrowing, his jaw clenched in concentration. He moved closer, his hands up, his fists clenched, his elbows close to his body. The two fighters met in the center of the cage, circling each other, sizing each other up. Damon scanned Mark's body, his eyes darting up and down, looking for an opening. He noticed Mark's leg foot was open, his weight shifted onto his back leg. Damon saw his chance, he threw a low kick, aiming for the inside of Mark's leg. The kick was swift, its impact loud, as Damon's foot connected with Mark's leg. Mark grunted, his face contorting in pain, as he hopped away, his leg buckling slightly. Damon quickly retreated, his hands still up, his eyes fixed on Mark, ready for his opponent's response. C-54. Chapter 54. Trading Blows. Mark smirked, his voice cutting through the tense air. You're out of your league, Cross. You think you're special, he taunted, his words laced with arrogance. Damon didn't respond, focusing instead on maintaining his stance. He shifted, slightly, his body light on his feet, prepared for Mark's next move. Mark's eyes narrowed, and he darted forward, feinting with his left hand before throwing a quick jab aimed at Damon's face. Damon saw it coming and swayed back, narrowly avoiding the punch. Mark's trying to bait Damon with those jabs, Michael Bosley commented from the table. He's setting up for something bigger. Yeah, but Damon's keeping his cool, Daniel Green added. He's not falling for it. Mark didn't let up, pressing forward with another jab, but this time, Damon snapped a quick low kick to Mark's lead leg. The kick connected with a solid thud, and Mark grunted, retreating slightly. You're gonna pay for that, Mark growled, shaking his leg out. He suddenly dropped his level and lunged for Damon's waist, going for a takedown. Damon reacted quickly, sprawling back and shoving Mark's head down, stopping the attempt. Nice defense by Damon, Michael noted. He saw that takedown coming a mile away. Mark pushed off, backing up a few steps before raising his fists again. He looked frustrated but determined. You're just running, Cross. Mark shouted, trying to rile Damon up. Come on, fight me. Damon didn't rise to the bait, staying calm. He shuffled forward and threw another low kick, this time targeting Mark's other leg. The kick hit its mark, and Mark winced, his stance faltering for a moment. Mark stepped forward, throwing a wild right hook. Damon ducked under it and fired a quick knee into Mark's midsection. The strike wasn't perfect, but it was enough to make Mark stumble back. Damon's picking him apart with those kicks and knees, Daniel observed. Mark's got to do something or this fight's going to slip away from him. Mark's eyes flashed with anger. He charged again, this time faking a takedown before throwing a hard right hand. Damon managed to block it with his forearm, but the force pushed him back a step. You're not as tough as you think. Mark snarled, throwing a left hook aimed at Damon's body. Damon twisted away, the punch glancing off his ribs without much effect. Damon retaliated with a sharp teep kick to Mark's stomach, pushing him back. Mark staggered but quickly regained his balance, his face twisted in frustration. Mark's trying to close the distance, but Damon's using his reach well, Michael said. He's keeping Mark at bay, making it hard for him to land anything significant. Mark rushed in again, this time with a combination of punches, but his form was sloppy, and Damon easily dodged the first few before blocking the rest. As Mark overextended with a wild swing, Damon stepped in, throwing an elbow that clipped Mark's cheek. The crowd reacted with a mix of cheers and gasps, sensing the shift in momentum. Damon's starting to find his rhythm, Daniel commented. But Mark's not out of this yet. He's got power if he can just land a clean shot. Mark wiped at his cheek, glaring at Damon. You got lucky with that one, he spat, his breath heavy. I'm gonna drop you, just wait. Damon didn't reply, his focus narrowing as he prepared for the next exchange. He knew Mark was getting desperate, and that's when mistakes happened. Mark lunged in again, but this time, Damon was ready. He fired a quick low kick, catching Mark's leg as he moved forward. Mark's knee buckled slightly, and Damon followed up with a straight right hand that landed flush on Mark's nose. Mark's head snapped back, and he stumbled, but he managed to stay on his feet. His face contorted in pain and anger, but he charged forward once more, swinging wildly. Damon kept his composure, dodging the wild punches before landing a stiff jab right down the middle. Mark's head snapped back again, and this time, his legs wobbled. Mark's in trouble, Michael exclaimed. He's swinging for the fences, but Damon's keeping calm and landing clean shots. Mark shook his head, trying to clear the cobwebs. He attempted another takedown, this one more desperate than the last, but Damon easily stuffed it, shoving Mark away. Mark staggered back, his chest heaving, sweat pouring down his face. Damon took a deep breath, staying ready, knowing the fight wasn't over yet. But the look in Mark's eyes showed that he was starting to realize just how tough Damon was. The final seconds of the round ticked away as Damon and Mark circled each other cautiously. Mark threw a half-hearted jab, but Damon easily sidestepped, maintaining his distance. The crowd's cheers echoed through the packed hall, the tension palpable. With a loud, metallic clang, the bell signaled the end of the round. Both fighters backed away, their expressions intense but controlled. Damon took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling as he made his way to his corner. He didn't have a team or coach waiting for him, just a lone stool where he sat, catching his breath and mentally reviewing the round. Mark, on the other hand, trudged to his corner, visibly frustrated. His corner team quickly surrounded him, offering water and advice as he leaned against the cage, his breaths heavy. Listen, Mark, his coach said firmly, his voice cutting through the noise of the crowd. You're letting him dictate the pace. He's keeping you at range with those kicks, and you're rushing in without thinking. Mark nodded, his eyes locked on his coach, but his frustration was clear. Stop trying to go for those takedowns unless you're setting them up better, the coach continued. He's reading them too easily. You need to feint more, make him commit, and then shoot in. If you keep telegraphing like that, he's just gonna stuff you every time. Mark clenched his fists, absorbing the advice. Look, he's got a reach advantage, and he's using it well, another corner man chimed in. But he's not invincible. His defense isn't perfect. He's dropping his hands a bit after those low kicks. If you time it right, you can catch him. And remember, you've got power. One good shot, and you can turn this around. Mark's coach nodded in agreement. Exactly. Don't just charge in like a bull. Be smart, work the body a bit, and when you see him drop his guard, go for that right hook. But you have to stay patient. Don't let him frustrate you. At Nobleman at. Mark took a deep breath, nodding again. Got it, he muttered, wiping the sweat from his brow. Across the cage, Damon remained quiet, his eyes focused and calm as he mentally prepared for the next round. He knew Mark would come out strong, and he needed to stay sharp. There was no one in his corner to advise him, but he trusted his instincts and training. C55. Chapter 55. Takedown successful. Michael Bosley and Daniel Green resumed their commentary as the second round approached. Welcome back, folks, Michael said, his voice lively. What an intense first round we just witnessed. Damon Cross and Mark Henderson are giving us a real show. Damon has been using his skills to keep Mark at bay, but Mark's coach has given him some crucial advice during the break. Daniel Green nodded in agreement. Absolutely, Michael. Mark was getting frustrated, but he's now aware of his mistakes. We should see some adjustments this round. If he manages to use his wrestling and feints effectively, he could turn things around. The bell rang to start the second round, and both fighters quickly moved to the center of the cage. Mark seemed more focused, moving with purpose as he feinted a jab and then shot in for a takedown. Damon anticipated it well, stepping back and using his knee to block Mark's advance. Mark tried again, changing his approach by throwing a combination of strikes before attempting another takedown. This time, he managed to get a grip on Damon's leg but couldn't secure the takedown, as Damon used his height to push Mark away. Damon took advantage of the situation, landing a quick knee to Mark's ribs. Mark grunted in pain but quickly countered with a right hook that caught Damon off guard, making him stagger slightly. "Whoa, what a hit!" Michael exclaimed. Damon wasn't expecting that. Mark's got some power in those punches. He's adapting well to the advice he received. At Nobleman at. Daniel added, "Yes, and that right hook was a solid strike." Damon's been relying heavily on his kicks, but Mark's showing he's got some impressive boxing skills too. This fight is really heating up. Damon shook off the hit, refocusing as he continued to circle Mark. He threw a high kick, which Mark dodged but couldn't completely avoid. The kick landed on Mark's shoulder, and he winced but quickly moved. Mark responded with a number of punches, landing a solid combination to Damon's upper body. Damon ate the hits, his breath coming harder with each strike. Despite his attempts to dodge and counter, Mark's punches found their mark, showing his boxing prowess. Damon managed to respond with a sharp elbow to Mark's head, causing him to back off momentarily. The commentators continued, "Damon's showing some resilience here. He's taking a few heavy hits, and he's eating them up. It's impressive how he's managing to stay on his feet and fight through the pain." Michael added, "It's true, Daniel. Damon's tough, but Mark's skills are proving to be a real challenge. This round has been a good battle of endurance and strategy." Mark, energized by his success, continued pressing the attack, throwing combos, and attempting more takedowns. Damon, even though battered, maintained his composure, using his height to keep Mark at a distance and deliver powerful kicks when he could. As the round progressed, both fighters showed their endurance, with Mark landing several more punches and Damon landing a few well-timed kicks and knees. The crowd was on their feet, cheering for both fighters as the action continued. The bell rang, ending the second round. Both fighters returned to their corners, visibly exhausted but determined. Mark's corner team offered him encouragement and continued to emphasize the importance of using his wrestling skills more effectively. Damon, in his corner alone, took deep breaths and prepared for the final round. As he sat in his corner, he took a moment to focus. The intensity of the fight and the stakes weighed heavily on him. "I can't lose this," he thought. "One and it's all over. I've come too far to let it slip away now." He glanced across the cage at Mark, his expression cold and resolute. He couldn't let anything distract him from his goal. The bell rang, marking the beginning of the third round. Both fighters emerged from their corners, clearly showing the fatigue of the previous rounds but still brimming with determination. Damon and Mark faced each other, their stances reflecting the weariness and resolve they both felt. Mark came forward aggressively, throwing a series of punches. He landed a sharp left hook to Damon's ribs, making Damon wince. Damon quickly responded with a front kick, catching Mark in the midsection, but Mark pressed forward, shaking off the impact. Damon landed a solid knee to Mark's chest, but Mark answered with a powerful overhand right that connected with Damon's jaw, causing his head to snap back with speed. Damon took a few steps back but regained his balance, shaking off the daze as he continued to fight. Mark's punches were landing with increasing accuracy. He caught Damon with an uppercut, making Damon's head snap back again. Damon felt the sting of the blows but kept moving, his eyes locked on Mark as he tried to assess his opponent's weaknesses. Damon managed to land a quick low kick to Mark's thigh, making him momentarily slow down. But Mark didn't let up. He followed with rapid punches, forcing Damon to backpedal. The commentators were engrossed in the action. Michael Bosley spoke over the broadcast, "Damon's taking some heavy hits here. Mark's punches are landing with precision, and Damon's defenses are being tested." Daniel Green added, "Yes, but Damon's not backing down either. He's countering with those powerful kicks and knees, but I feel it's coming to a climax." Mark continued to press forward, throwing a combination of punches and attempting to close the distance. Despite the effective strikes from both fighters, Mark's determination was evident, the arrogance from the Farad round gone. He charged at Damon, throwing a series of hard punches. With less than a minute left in the round, Mark executed a quick feint, making Damon react defensively. Mark then launched a powerful right hook that Damon failed to avoid. Seizing the moment, Mark grabbed Damon's legs and pulled them out from under him. Damon fell heavily to the canvas, and Mark followed up, trying to secure a dominant position. Damon struggled on the ground, attempting to escape from Mark's hold. Mark used his weight to maintain control, keeping Damon pinned and working to improve his position. Damon pushed against Mark, trying to get back to his feet, but Mark's wrestling background gave him an advantage in this situation. The crowd watched intently as Mark tried to solidify his control. Michael Bosley's voice came through the broadcast, Mark Henderson with a successful takedown. Damon's been on the defensive for most of this round, and Mark's wrestling skills have finally come into play. Daniel Green added, "It's a crucial moment in the fight. Damon's got to find a way to get out from underneath Mark or risk losing the round." C56. Chapter 56. Jaw Crusher. As the final round neared its end, Damon felt the weight of his situation. The knowledge of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu granted to him by the system was in his mind, but it wasn't like Muay Thai. BJJ needed a partner, someone to grapple with, to learn the nuances of every move. Muay Thai also needed a partner, but Damon had managed to train on his own, practicing kicks, elbows, and knees, repeating them over and over until they became second nature. But BJJ, that was a different beast. Without someone to train with, without real experience, he was stuck. The fight resumed, with Mark locking eyes on Damon, intent on finishing what he had started. Mark's corner had emphasized using his wrestling skills to dominate Damon on the ground, and now that he had Damon down, he wasn't about to let the opportunity slip away. Mark shifted his weight, trying to pass Damon's guard and move into a more dominant position. Damon struggled beneath him, trying to use his BJJ knowledge to create space and escape, but it was easier said than done. Mark's wrestling was solid, his control tight as he worked to maintain his advantage. Damon felt Mark's hands pushing against his chest, trying to pin him down further. Mark's body pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. Damon knew he had to do something, and fast. The commentators were quick to notice the shift in momentum. "Mark is really asserting his dominance here," Michael Bosley commented. "You can see him using his weight and skills to keep Damon pinned down. Damon's groundwork knowledge seems to be non-existent, but Mark's experience is real, and it's showing." Daniel Green nodded. "Absolutely, Michael. Damon's in a tough spot right now. He's trying to find a way out, but Mark's not giving him any room to breathe." Mark tried to improve his position, but Damon was doing his best to keep him at bay. Despite his lack of practical BJJ experience, Damon had some understanding of what to do. He managed to get his legs between them, pushing Mark away slightly, but it wasn't enough. Mark was relentless, his wrestling experience coming into play as he kept pushing forward, trying to break through Damon's defenses. Damon's mind raced as he tried to recall the techniques he had learned. It wasn't easy. The pressure from Mark was overwhelming, and Damon could feel his energy draining. Mark, on the other hand, seemed to be getting stronger, feeding off his control in the fight. Damon needed to find an opening, a chance to turn the tables. Then, it happened. Mark made a slight mistake, a momentary lapse in his control. Damon felt it, a small shift in Mark's balance that gave him just enough room to maneuver. It wasn't much, but it was something. He acted quickly, reaching up with his arms, trying to wrap them around Mark's neck. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was the only chance he had. "Wait a minute," Michael's voice rose with excitement. "Damon's going for a guillotine. But it looks a bit sloppy. Can he lock it in?" "It's not the cleanest technique," Daniel agreed, "but Damon's doing what he can with what he's got. If he can just get that arm in the right position." Damon managed to get his arm around Mark's head, pulling him down closer. It was a sloppy guillotine choke, not as tight as it should be, but it was something. Damon squeezed with all his strength, feeling the strain in his muscles as he tried to lock in the submission. His arm pressed against Mark's jaw, the inside of his elbow digging in. Mark's eyes widened in surprise as he realized what was happening. He tried to pull away, but Damon had a firm grip. The choke wasn't deep, but the pressure on Mark's jaw was intense, and Damon could feel the resistance. Mark struggled, his body writhing as he tried to escape, but the more he moved, the tighter Damon's hold became. "He's got it, he's got it," Michael shouted. Damon's got Mark in a choke, but it's not under the chin, he's crushing Mark's jaw. "This could be bad for Mark," Daniel added. "That's gotta hurt." Mark's struggling, but that pressure on his jaw could break something if he's not careful. Damon's using everything he has here. Damon's heart pounded in his chest as he held on for dear life. He knew this was his only chance. The pressure on Mark's jaw was increasing, and Damon could feel the strain on his own arms. His muscles burned, but he didn't let go. The thought of losing this fight, of everything slipping away, gave him the strength to keep going. Mark's struggles grew more desperate as the seconds ticked by. At Nobleman at. He tried to push Damon away, to free himself from the choke, but Damon's grip was unyielding. The pain in Mark's jaw was excruciating, and Damon could feel the tension building. It was a battle of wills, both fighters giving everything they had. Mark's in serious trouble now, Michael said, his voice filled with tension. If Damon can hold this just a little longer, Mark might be forced to tap before the bell rings. Daniel was equally invested. You can see the desperation on Mark's face. He's in agony, and Damon's not letting up. This could be the end right here. And it was over. Mark's hand slapped against Damon's side, tapping out in submission. The pain in his jaw was too much, and he knew he couldn't continue. Damon felt the tap, and for a moment, he didn't realize what had happened. But then, it hit him. He had won. Mark had tapped out. The referee quickly stepped in, pulling them apart as the crowd erupted in cheers. Damon lay on the canvas, gasping for breath as the realization sank in. He had done it. Against all odds, he had managed to secure the win. The guillotine choke had been sloppy, far from perfect, but it had worked. Damon had survived, and more importantly, he had won. Mark rolled away, clutching his jaw, clearly in pain but also relieved that the fight was over. Damon sat up slowly, still trying to catch his breath. The crowd's cheers echoed in his ears, a mixture of disbelief and admiration for the gritty performance they had just witnessed. C57. Chapter 57. Post-fight analysis. The commentators, Michael Bosley and Daniel Green, sat at their desk, microphones in hand, analyzing the fight that had just concluded. Another win for Damon Cross, Michael said, his voice filled with excitement. He's on a 2-win streak now. You can see he had the match under control in the first round. Daniel nodded in agreement. Yes, and then he lost it in the second round. But he managed to turn the tables. I mean, a knockout and a submission in 2 matches in a row is impressive. Michael continued, Damon's performance was remarkable. He showed great resilience and adaptability. He was able to adjust his strategy mid-fight and capitalize on Mark's mistakes. Daniel added, I also noticed something amazing. I saw some knowledge of groundwork from Damon. He was able to use his body positioning and leverage to escape from bad positions. I'm sure if he had a good team behind him, he would be a force to be reckoned with. Michael chimed in, well, Daniel, if he keeps performing like this, I don't think he'll stay a loner for long. He's got a good head on his shoulders, and his skills are undeniable. He's definitely a fighter to watch out for in the future. The camera panned out, showing the commentators' desk, the crowd in the background, still cheering and chanting Damon's name. Michael and Daniel continued to analyze the fight, discussing Damon's strengths and weaknesses, and speculating about his future in the sport. Their voices were filled with enthusiasm and expertise, providing a detailed and insightful breakdown of the match. As they spoke, the camera cut to shots of Damon, still in the cage, being attended to by the medical staff. He was smiling, his eyes shining with pride and exhaustion. He had given it his all, and it had paid off. As the medical team finished their checks, they packed up their equipment and left the cage, giving the fighters space. Damon, still catching his breath, walked over to the referee and extended his hand, shaking it firmly. The referee smiled and nodded in respect. Next, Damon turned to Mark, his opponent, and stretched out his hand once more, expecting a shake. But Mark just glanced at it, his expression twisted in a scowl. He scoffed, a harsh sound that filled the silence, and turned away. Damon's hand hung in the air for a moment before he slowly lowered it. He looked around at the crowd, the commentators, a hint of a smile on his face. He mumbled to himself, his voice barely audible, 1 down, 2 more to go. The words were simple, but they held a weight of determination. Damon's eyes gleamed with a fierce light, his jaw set in a firm line. He took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. The referee grasped both fighters' hands, his grip firm and authoritative. The announcer stepped into the ring, his voice booming through the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, after 3 rounds of intense action, we have a winner. He declared, his words echoing off the walls of the arena. The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices a deafening roar. The announcer paused, savoring the moment. At 2 minutes and 43 seconds of round 3, by way of submission, a guillotine choke, and the winner is. He drew out the pause, building the tension. The referee raised Damon's arm, his hand clenched in a fist. The announcer yelled out the winner's name, his voice ringing through the arena. Damon Cross. The crowd exploded into cheers, their voices a cacophony of excitement. Damon's face split into a wide grin, his eyes shining with pride and exhaustion. The referee patted him on the back, a nod of respect on his face. Michael Bosley nodded in agreement, his eyes still shining with excitement. Absolutely, Daniel. That was an incredible opening fight. Damon Cross has set the bar high, and I'm sure the other fighters are taking note. Daniel Green leaned forward, his voice filled with enthusiasm. And what a way to start the night. A submission win in the 3rd round. Michael smiled. Well, we're just getting started. Stay tuned, folks. It's going to be a wild ride. Damon left the cage, the crowd's cheers still echoing in his ears. He couldn't help but smirk, feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment. As he walked out, he was met with a sea of faces, all congratulating him on his win. He nodded his head in appreciation, his eyes scanning the room for a quiet place to escape the chaos. He made his way through the crowded hallway, his footsteps quiet on the carpeted floor. He passed by staff members, who patted him on the back and offered words of encouragement. He also greeted fellow fighters, who nodded in respect and admiration. Finally, he arrived at the room assigned to him, a small sanctuary away from the noise and excitement. He closed the door behind him, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. He leaned back against the door, his eyes closing as he let out a deep sigh. At nobleman at. What a night, he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible. I almost lost. He shook his head, remembering the moments when Mark had gained the upper hand. But he had persevered, using every ounce of skill and determination to turn the fight around. He pushed himself off the door and walked towards the table in the center of the room. He sat down, his body feeling heavy with exhaustion. He ran his hands through his hair, feeling the sweat and adrenaline still coursing through his veins. The room was quiet, the only sound the distant murmur of the crowd. Damon closed his eyes, savoring the peace and quiet. He took a deep breath, feeling his heart rate slow down, and his muscles relax. He knew he had a long night ahead of him, but for now, he just wanted to rest and enjoy the feeling of victory. C58. Chapter 58. Gotcha spin. The system suddenly ding. Damon's eyes snapped towards the sound, and he opened the system interface. Quest completed. Reward. 10 coins. He smiled, chuckling to himself. It felt good to complete a quest and get rewarded. But then, another ding sounded. Damon sat up, confusion etched on his face. He didn't have any quest completed, was it a new one? He looked at the system interface again. 63/50ths matches completed. Achievement acquired. Reward. Lottery gotcha wheel. You have 3 free spins. Damon's eyes widened. What was this? He didn't know what a gotcha wheel was, but it sounded interesting. He read on. Function. The lottery gotcha wheel is a wheel you spin. It can land in different sections, from elixir, gear, tech, skillset, random, none. Damon's eyes scanned the text. He still didn't understand what a gotcha wheel was, but he liked the sound of it. He stood up, a smile spreading across his face. This was amazing, but how does he get spins? As if listening to his thoughts, the system interface changed. Spins are gained in every fight. 1 win means 1 spin. 10 accumulated spins can be used for a mega spin. Damon's eyes lit up. Oh, so he gets spins for winning fights. And he can use them to spin the wheel. He felt a surge of excitement. This was going to be fun. He stood there, staring at the system interface, thinking of every possibility possible. He couldn't wait to start spinning the wheel and seeing what rewards he would get. At nobleman at. Damon's hand trembled with anticipation as he reached out to touch the interface. His finger hovered over the screen, hesitating for a moment before tapping on the golden wheel. The wheel filled the entire screen, its sections gleaming with a soft, golden light. The none section took up a large chunk of the wheel, its blank space seeming to stare at Damon like an empty void. The random section was equally spacious, its mysterious nature making Damon's heart race with excitement. In contrast, the other sections were tiny, cramped into small slivers of space. Tech and skillset were the smallest, their narrow wedges making them seem like impossible targets. Damon's eyes darted back and forth, studying the wheel's layout. He noticed that the elixir section was slightly larger than the two, its gentle glow seeming to pulse with an otherworldly energy. The gear section was nestled between elixir and tech, its small space filled with swirling patterns. Damon's finger twitched, eager to touch the screen and set the wheel in motion. As he gazed at the wheel, Damon felt his excitement build. He couldn't wait to see where the wheel would land, what reward he would receive. Damon's finger tapped the screen, and the golden wheel sprang to life. It spun rapidly, a blur of color and light that made Damon's eyes water. He squinted, his gaze fixed on the wheel as it began to slow down. For a moment, it seemed to land on the skillset section, and Damon's heart skipped a beat. But then, the wheel jerked forward, moving again. Damon's eyes widened as it passed over the tech section, his fist clenching involuntarily as if trying to stop the wheel physically. The wheel slowed down even further, its rotation becoming sluggish and labored. Damon's eyes were glued to the screen, his breath caught in his throat. And then, it finally came to a stop, the pointer trembling on the none section. Congratulations for winning nothing. Try again next time. Damon's face contorted in a mixture of shock, anger, and disbelief. His eyes bulged, and his mouth dropped open. This is a damn scam. He shouted, throwing his hands up in the air. His arms flailed wildly, as if trying to physically express his frustration. His fingers splayed, and his palms faced the ceiling. Damon's face reddened, and his voice echoed through the room. He took a step back, his eyes still fixed on the screen. The words, "Congratulations for winning nothing," seemed to mock him, their bright, cheerful tone a stark contrast to Damon's intense emotions. Damon's chest heaved, his breathing rapid and shallow. He felt like he'd been punched in the gut, his excitement and anticipation replaced by anger and disappointment. Damon's laughter echoed through the room, a deep, throaty sound. Ha ha hey hey hey. He remembered he still had 2 more spins, and his anger dissipated. He removed the message, and the wheel reappeared. He spun again, and the wheel sprang to life. This time, Damon closed his eyes, his face relaxed. He heard the wheel spinning, a soft whirring sound. Then, he heard a click. Damon opened his eyes, and a bright message greeted him. Congratulations for winning gear. You have won a punching bag. At first, Damon's face fell. That's so damn use, he started to say, but then he paused. He looked at the reward again, and a slow smile spread across his face. Not useless, he said, his voice filled with excitement. This is good. Oh, I love you, system. He professed his love, his eyes shining with gratitude. Damon had been complaining about not having a partner to train with, but now he had something to hit. A punching bag. He could practice his punches, work on his technique. He felt a surge of joy, his heart filled with excitement. He couldn't wait to start using the punching bag, to feel the leather beneath his fists. Damon's face glowed with happiness, his smile stretching from ear to ear. He felt like he'd won the jackpot, like the system had finally given him something he truly needed. Damon's finger hovered over the screen, ready to spin the wheel again. But then, he caught himself. I should stop, he thought, his hand hesitating in midair. He looked at the wheel, its golden light gleaming enticingly. He was enjoying this, maybe a bit too much. He. The thrill of the unknown, the rush of excitement, it was all so captivating. But Damon knew he shouldn't get too carried away. He took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing slightly as he made a decision. Okay, I'll wait, he thought. He would wait maybe a day, then spin again, and capitalize on his daily luck. Damon smiled to himself, feeling a sense of control wash over him. He could do this, he could pace himself. Gambling was fun, yippee. C59. Chapter 59. Mistakes. Damon removed the interface, the golden light fading from his sight. He stretched his arms, feeling a sense of satisfaction wash over him. He had won a punching bag, and he couldn't wait to start training with it. Opening the shop, he browsed through the items, his eyes scanning the list. He stopped at the food section and selected a banana, purchasing it for 1 system coin. I have plenty, he thought, and I'm not going to stop getting more. He packed up his plastic bag, which had his normal clothes, and headed towards the locker room showers. The smell of sweat and soap filled the air as he entered the locker room. He put his stuff on the bench, his eyes adjusting to the bright lights. Damon walked into the shower, the warm water enveloping him. He let out a sigh, feeling the tension in his muscles ease. He grabbed the soap and started washing himself, the suds sliding down his skin. The water pounded against his skin, a steady beat that seemed to wash away his worries. Damon closed his eyes, letting the warmth seep into his bones. He stood there for a moment, savoring the feeling of relaxation. As he washed, Damon thought about his next move. He had the punching bag, and he was eager to start training. At Novelban at. He would have to find a good spot to set it up, maybe the parking lot, but he would have to take it back in the room, if he wanted still have something to train with, who knew what those crackhead would do for drug money. As the warm water flowed down his body, Damon's mind began to wander to his past fights. He thought about the mistakes he had made, the opportunities he had missed, and the weaknesses he had exposed. He wasn't perfect, far from it. He was unskilled, and he knew it. Even with the system, he still had to hone himself so he wouldn't even dare call himself a real fighter until he won in a way he felt satisfied by it. Damon's thoughts lingered on his fight today and the one before it. He had wanted to ignore going to the ground, to avoid it at all costs. But he knew he couldn't ignore it forever. His Brazilian jiu-jitsu skills were limited to knowledge, not practical experience. He had the knowledge from the system, but he had never actually practiced it. The reality of his weakness hit him hard. If someone who actually knew what they were doing took him down, he was done for. That was exactly what had almost happened today. If Mark hadn't made that small mistake, Damon would have lost the fight. He had to admit it to himself. He had won that match by fluke. Damon's thoughts swirled with frustration. He couldn't rely on luck to win fights, but how could he improve without a training partner? He kinda missed his friend, and wished he was here to help him train. If Joey were here, Damon knew he would have pushed him to be better. But then again, if Joey hadn't left, maybe this opportunity with Battle Extreme wouldn't have existed. Maybe Damon would still be fighting in backyard brawls, which he enjoyed, but didn't want to be his life. He wanted more. Damon's frustration grew, and he let out a growl. He punched the tile wall, a mistake that made him wince in pain. He shook his hand, relieved he hadn't broken it. Just then, a voice came from the locker room. "Hey dude, you fine in there?" Damon realized he may not be alone. He turned off the shower and grabbed a towel, wrapping it around his waist. "Ah yeah, I'm fine," he said, trying to sound calm. "Just going through my fight analysis." He didn't want to draw attention to his frustration. Damon stepped out of the shower, his eyes adjusting to the bright lights of the locker room. He saw a figure sitting on the bench, looking at him with concern. Damon nodded, trying to reassure him. Damon's eyes met Edward's, and he smiled, feeling a sense of camaraderie. Edward's handshake was firm, his hand small but strong. As they shook hands, Damon took in Edward's appearance. He was short, probably around 5 feet 5 inches, with a lean build. His hair was messy, a sandy blonde color that stuck up in every direction. His eyes were a bright blue, sparkling with friendliness. "Haha, I was just thinking about my match," Damon said, his voice deep and smooth. "It's cool, I do that too," the guy replied, his eyes sparkling with friendliness. "Wait, you were the one opening the match tonight, right? Saw your submission. Good job, man. I heard you don't have a team." Damon nodded, feeling a sense of connection with Edward. "Yeah, that's me," he said, his voice deep and smooth. "Thanks, man. I was lucky to get the submission." Edward grinned, his teeth white and even. "Lucky? Nah. You were skilled, man. I saw the whole thing. You've got some serious talent." Damon shrugged, feeling a sense of pride. "Thanks, I try my best." As they talked, Damon noticed the sound of lockers opening and closing. Seems people were coming in. Edward nodded, his eyes serious. "Yeah, I know what you mean. I'm trying my luck too. I don't exactly have a team or coach yet. Maybe we'll see each other around." Damon's eyes widened at the coincidence. "I'm Damon, by the way. Edward, but my friends call me Eddie," the guy said, his smile still plastered on his face. "Anyway, Eddie, I gotta bounce," Damon said, nodding. "I can't stay long. I'll probably see you next event. Need to rest and recover, then back to training." As they parted ways, Damon felt a sense of connection with Edward. They were both fighters, both alone in this competition. Damon continued dressing, his movements slow and deliberate. He pulled on his shirt, feeling the soft fabric slide over his skin. His jeans were next. He laced up his shoes, then stomped them on the ground. He grabbed his plastic, slinging it over his shoulder, and headed out of the locker room. As Damon walked out of the building, the guards gave him a friendly pat down, then nodded and let him pass. Walking across the parking lot, he reached into his bag and pulled out a banana. He peeled it with a quick flick of his wrist, then took a bite, and he chewed contentedly. As he walked, he spotted a trash can and tossed the banana peel into it. He continued on, his eyes scanning the street for a cab. After a few minutes of walking, he spotted a taxi and hailed it. The driver pulled over, and Damon got in, giving him the address of his hotel. As the cab drove off, Damon settled back into the seat, feeling a sense of exhaustion wash over him. He closed his eyes, letting the motion of the car put him into a state of relaxation. C60. Chapter 60. Drive home. And we're almost here. The driver's voice woke Damon up from his sleep. Damon yawned, stretching his arms over his head, feeling the familiar ache in his muscles. Thank you, he said, his voice still husky from sleep. At Novelban at. The driver chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. You a fighter? He asked, his gaze flicking to Damon's face with a hint of amusement. Damon sat up straight, nodding sheepishly. Yeah, I fight. It's just amateur, but I'm pretty sure I'm getting paid in bruises. The driver laughed, a deep rumbling sound. Well, you're definitely getting paid in bruises. I mean, I've seen some rough faces in my time, but yours takes the cake. Damon laughed, feeling a sense of familiarity with the driver. Hey, at least I'm consistent, right? The driver grinned. That you are, kid. That you are. So, how did you get into fighting? Damon shrugged. Just something I've always been interested in, I guess. And I've got a lot of anger to work out. Mixing truths and lies. Damon's curiosity got the better of him. How did you know I fight? Besides my face, of course, he asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. The driver's gaze remained fixed on the road ahead. Well, for starters, I know of the event you fight in, he said, his voice low and smooth. Damon raised an eyebrow. You a fan? He asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. The driver let out a deep laugh. But no. My kid fights there, he said, his voice filled with pride, but also a tinge of sadness. Damon's confusion was evident. You don't want him to fight? He asked, his brow furrowed. The driver shook his head. No, nothing like that. It's just, I've been diagnosed with cancer, he said, his voice cracking slightly. Damon didn't say anything, letting the man pour his heart out. It's got the whole family shook up, the driver continued. They start treating me like an egg. It's curable, but you know, money. Damon nodded sympathetically. And we all know the money I make from cabs isn't enough for that, the driver said, his voice laced with frustration. So the kid decided to take things into his own hands and started fighting. The driver's voice swelled with pride. I'm proud he's determined and passionate, but that same passion scares me. He's putting all his heart into this. I'm afraid what will happen if it doesn't work out. The driver's eyes clouded over. I know I have to be positive, but he's not getting paid there. And from what I've heard, it takes years before those big companies notice you. I'd rather him go to college than this. The driver's words lingered in the car. You could tell his words were a mix of hope and fear, as the taxi continued to roll down the darkening streets. Damon leaned back on the seat, sighing, but the man suddenly spoke up again. But I heard him talk about being offered something, but I think it's a scam to get him to fight harder. Damon's interest was piqued. MMH, an offer. What's the offer? He asked, his voice curious. The driver chuckled. He said some scum in a suit offered him a chance to get a team, a coach, and better competition, and even pay. All he needed to do was just win 3 fights. Damon froze, his mind racing. Wasn't that the same offer Mr. Steele had made to him? He smiled, his pride a bit hurt. He had thought he was the only one. Why do you think it's a scam? It could be real, Damon asked, his eyes narrowing. The driver's expression turned skeptical. Kid, I know you're young, but who in their right mind would give such offers for free? I think they're just trying to make young fighters fight harder so they get good shows for their events. The driver's words hung in the air, a mix of concern and suspicion. Damon's mind was racing, thinking about the offer he had received. Was it too good to be true? The taxi continued to roll down the streets, the only sound the sound of the engine and the driver's occasional cough. Damon's eyes gazed out the window, lost in thought. The driver's voice broke the silence. I just don't want my kid to get hurt, that's all. I know he's passionate about fighting, but I also know he's not thinking clearly. Damon nodded sympathetically, his mind still racing with thoughts of the offer. Was it a scam, or was it the real deal? He didn't know, and honestly, he didn't care, as long as he fights. The ride was silent for the rest of the way, the only sound being the sound of the engine and the occasional passing of cars. Finally, the driver spoke up. "We're finally here, kid." The taxi pulled up to the motel, the neon sign creaking in the gentle breeze. Damon got out, stretching his arms over his head. "Thanks for the ride," he said, his voice sincere. He took out his wallet and paid the fare, adding a generous tip. "Also, I hope things look up for you," he said, his eyes locking onto the driver's. "Get well soon." The driver smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Thanks, kid. Take care of yourself." With that, the driver put the car in gear and drove off, leaving Damon standing alone in front of the motel. Damon stood there for a moment, lost in thought. He couldn't help but wonder what he would do if his mother had cancer. Would he be like that man's son, fighting to make ends meet and trying to stay positive? Damon's eyes gazed off into the distance, his mind racing with thoughts of his own family. He shook his head, clearing his thoughts. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill his lungs. He looked up at the motel, the neon sign casting a colorful glow over the parking lot. C61. Chapter 61. To the Physical World. Morning hit the motel windows, casting a warm glow over the room. Damon turned, hearing the curtains open with a soft rustle. He opened his eyes, squinting slightly at the bright light. "Morning, Mom," he said, sitting up in bed. He raised his hand to rub his eyes, then paused midair, remembering that he wasn't exactly fully recovered. It had been a few days since the fight, and Damon wasn't feeling well. He had been looking forward to opening his new punching bag, but he had held off, to recover. Aoife answered. "Morning, Damon," her voice warm and gentle. She turned around, looking at Damon, and forced a smile after glancing at his bruised body. Her eyes lingered on the purple marks on his face and the bandages on his hands. Damon sat up, stretching his hand, trying to play it cool. "You're up early," he joked, attempting to hide the pain he felt. Aoife scoffed. "More like you're up late," she said with a smirk, moving away from the curtains. Her long, dark hair swayed behind her as she walked towards the small kitchenette in the motel room. Damon swung his legs over the side of the bed, feeling the soft carpet beneath his feet. He stood up slowly, stretching his arms over his head and arching his back. "At Nobleman at." His muscles protested with a dull ache, but he ignored it, knowing it was just part of the healing process. Aoife turned around, watching him with a concerned expression. "You should be resting, Damon," she said, her voice firm but gentle. Damon shrugged, trying to downplay his injuries. "I'm fine, Mom. Just a few bruises," he said, attempting to smile. Aoife raised an eyebrow, her expression skeptical. "A few bruises," she repeated, and said with sarcasm evident in her voice. "You look like you've been through a war." Damon chuckled, wincing as his ribs protested. "It was just a tough fight," he said, trying to reassure her. Aoife sighed, shaking her head. "You need to take care of yourself, Damon. You can't keep pushing yourself like this." Damon stood up. He walked towards his mom, his bare feet making soft sounds on the carpet. He put his hand on her shoulder, trying to reassure her. "I'm fine, see," he said, attempting a smile. Aoife just smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. She playfully nudged him with her elbow, trying to get a reaction out of him. Damon let out a mock "ah" as he moved aside, protecting his bruised ribs. "Nice try. Wrong side," he said, chuckling and shaking his head. He moved towards the bathroom. He grabbed some clean clothes from the counter, wincing as he lifted his arms to take off his shirt. He closed the door, standing in front of the mirror, and let out a deep sigh. "Man, I hope that elixir shop has some stuff that can help me heal," he said to himself, examining his reflection. He couldn't wait to complete the quest and check out what rewards it had. He undressed and entered the shower, feeling the warm water flow over his body. As he stood under the stream, he couldn't help but think back to days before, specifically the cab driver he had met. He remembered the man's story, his son fighting to support him, and the weight of that responsibility. Damon's mind wandered, imagining what it would be like if his mother's life depended on him winning every fight. He knew it was a heavy burden, one that the cab driver's son probably felt every day. He thought about the pressure, the stress, and the fear that came with it. He stood there for a few moments, lost in thought, before finally turning off the water and stepping out of the shower. He grabbed a towel and began to dry himself. As he dressed in the clean clothes he had grabbed earlier. The clothes he wore were solely for training, a pair of worn-out sweatpants and a faded t-shirt. He wasn't going to let these bruises stop him from doing what he needed to do. Each day he missed meant he was losing days of progress, and he couldn't afford that. So he finished up, cleaning up the bathroom, making sure to wipe down the sink and toilet, and then went out to the parking lot. The bright sunlight hit him like a slap in the face, making him squint. He raised a hand to shield his eyes, feeling the warm rays on his skin. The parking lot was empty, except for a few cars scattered here and there. Damon's eyes scanned the area, taking in the familiar sights. Damon looked around, scanning the empty parking lot. He was about to open his system interface, but then paused, thinking better of it. That would be reckless, he thought. What if someone was watching him, observing his every move? He couldn't afford to have his secret revealed, not now, not ever. Damon took a careful look around. No movement, no people. He felt a sense of caution, realizing how easily he could make a mistake. He decided against using the system here. It wasn't safe. Instead, he made up his mind to go for a run. It was a better way to clear his head and keep up with his training. He'll also just access the inventory right around the corner. He took a deep breath and started jogging, leaving the parking lot behind. Damon arrived around the corner, making sure he was alone. He glanced around cautiously, his eyes scanning the empty street. Satisfied that no one was watching, he opened the system interface. The familiar screen flickered to life, displaying his inventory. Damon's eyes landed on the punching bag icon, and he clicked on it. The description popped up, and he read through it quickly. Bag of steel, a sturdy, oversized punching bag designed for intense training. He could use it for low kicks, practicing his technique and building his strength. Damon's fingers hovered over the button, ready to bring the bag into the physical world. As he hesitated, he thought about the perfect spot to set up the bag. With a decisive nod, Damon clicked the button. The system interface flashed, and the punching bag materialized in front of him. It was bigger than he expected. Damon cracked his knuckles, a fierce grin spreading across his face. It was time to put in the work, to push himself to the limit. C62. Chapter 62. Testing out my punching bag. Damon stood in front of a sturdy tree, and a black and blue punching bag hung from a branch. The bag swayed gently in the breeze, its surface reflecting the sunlight filtering through the leaves. He reached out to shake the bag, testing its stability, but the moment he did, a loud crack split the air. The branch creaked and groaned, its fibers snapping under the weight of the bag. Damon's eyes widened as he instinctively reached out to grab the bag, his hands wrapping around it to hold it in place. The branch fell, its splintered end scraping against his arm, leaving a faint scratch. At it Nobleman at. He sighed, feeling a mix of frustration and disappointment. He had been looking forward to training with the new bag, and now he would have to find a new spot to hang it. He looked around, taking in the surroundings, searching for a new tree with a sturdier branch. Damon's eyes landed on a nearby tree, its branches thicker and more robust. He walked towards it, the punching bag still clutched in his hands. He examined the branches, searching for the perfect spot to hang the bag. His fingers traced the grooves and knots on the tree's surface, feeling for any weaknesses. Damon climbed the tree, his hands gripping the rough bark as he ascended higher. He reached a sturdy branch and grasped it firmly, pulling himself up to do a few pull-ups. His muscles flexed as he lifted his body. He dropped down, his feet thudding against the trunk, and smiled, satisfied with the branch's sturdiness. He hooked the punching bag to the branch, pulling the chain as he wrapped around the tree, then hooked the chain on itself. He stepped back, admiring his handiwork, and let out a laugh. It's time to break this thing, he said, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. The punching bag swayed gently in the breeze, its surface reflecting the sunlight filtering through the leaves. Damon's eyes fixed on the bag, his mind focused on the upcoming training session. He cracked his knuckles, feeling the familiar surge of energy and determination. Damon picked up the plastic wrapping that covered his MMA gloves, the crinkling sound filling the air as he pulled them out. He had received these gloves from the system when he first got it, and they still looked brand new, despite the fights they had been through. He slipped his hands into the gloves, feeling the soft, padded interior envelop his fingers. The gloves fit snugly, providing a comfortable grip. He looked at the punching bag, its black and blue surface reflecting the sunlight filtering through the leaves. He nudged it gently with his gloved hand, feeling the bag's weight and resistance. Satisfied, he took a step back, his eyes fixed on the bag. Damon threw a power punch, his gloved fist connecting with the bag with a loud bang. Bang! The impact sent shockwaves through the bag, causing it to sway violently. The sound of the punch echoed through the air, a sharp, crisp noise. The bag's surface rippled from the force of the blow, its material stretching to absorb the impact. The tree's branches creaked softly, a gentle accompaniment to the sound of Damon's punching. He rolled his shoulders, then unleashed a swift jab. Thud. The bag rocked back, its chains rattling. Damon followed up with a hard kick, his shin connecting with the bag's side. Thud. The impact vibrated through his leg, but he didn't stop. He threw an elbow, then another punch. His breath came out in steady, controlled bursts, each strike a precise, practiced movement. Thud. Thud. Sweat started to bead on his forehead. His muscles burned, but he relished the sensation. Damon knew this was where he got stronger, with every hit, every drop of sweat. He decided to go for a combo: jab, cross, kick. Each strike hit its mark, the sounds of his blows filling the quiet around him. Over an hour passed. Damon stepped back for a moment, wiping the sweat from his brow. His breath was heavier now, but he wasn't done. He wanted to push himself further. He lined up for a question mark kick, lifting his leg and aiming to swing it high before dropping it low. But as he twisted, his timing was off. Thud. His foot clipped the side of the bag, not quite hitting where he intended. Damon stumbled slightly, frustration flaring for a brief second. He steadied himself, shaking his head. Gotta get that right, he muttered under his breath. Ignoring the sting of disappointment, Damon stepped forward again, this time throwing a powerful straight punch. Thud. The bag swung back, and Damon could feel the strain in his arms and legs. He was tired, but it was the kind of tired that told him he was pushing his limits. Finally, he stopped, breathing hard. The bag swayed slowly, the chains creaking above. Damon wiped his face with the back of his hand, taking a moment to catch his breath. He'd botched the kick, sure, but that was just one step in the process. Damon burst out laughing, the sound echoing through the air as he thought about the proficiency feature. He wanted to master all of his moves, and the thought filled him with excitement. He took a step back, bouncing around on the balls of his feet, his eyes fixed on the punching bag. He continued training, imagining himself in a real fight. He pictured his opponent in front of him, their fists flying towards him. Damon dodged and weaved, his gloved hands punching the bag with precision and power. He kicked and elbowed, his movements swift and deadly. Oh, how he wished the bag could punch back, giving him a true test of his skills. But he didn't let that stop him. He kept pushing himself. Especially, he focused on the question mark kick. He had missed it earlier, but now he was determined to get it right. He lifted his leg, twisting his hips and generating power from his core. His foot swung through the air, aiming for the bag's center. He continued training, his movements fluid and confident. Sweat dripped from his brow, his muscles burning with fatigue, but he didn't stop. He was in the zone, his focus solely on improving his skills. The punching bag swayed back and forth, its surface worn from Damon's relentless assault. Damon's laughter had stopped, replaced by a serious face. He was a warrior in training. C63. Chapter 63. Back home. Damon finished his training session, sitting back against the tree trunk, feeling exhausted but satisfied. He thought to himself, this is the best training I've had since I started. He had improved significantly, correcting mistakes in his form and working on finding a flow in his movements during a fight. As he reflected on his training, Damon noticed something about himself: his temper. He had a tendency to get impatient and throw unnecessary punches when his initial ones didn't land as planned. This wasn't just limited to training, he had done the same thing in actual fights. Damon realized that working on his temper and learning to calm down during fights was essential. He sat on the ground, his back against the tree trunk, his eyes fixed on the space in front of him. He didn't want to lie down, didn't want to look up at the lights, didn't want to hear the announcer's voice declaring his opponent the winner. All because he threw a tantrum, lost control, and let his emotions get the better of him. He thought about his training, how he had tried to manage his temper, to prevent himself from getting angry when he failed. But it was hard, so hard. He would do okay for a while, and then something would happen, and he would lose it again. He would end up angry, frustrated, and disappointed in himself. Damon shook his head, sighing deeply. He felt the weight of his failure, the weight of his temper over him. He knew he needed to work on it, to get better, to be better. He decided to open up his system status interface, to take a look at his stats, to see where he was, where he needed to go. The blue light lit up his face, illuminating his features, casting a glow over his skin. Personal information. Name. Damon Cross. Nickname. Age. 19. Nationality. Irish Japan. Physical information. Weight. 125 pounds. Height. 6 feet 2 inches. Reach. Arm. 74 inches. Leg. 34 inches. Weight class. Flyweight. Fights. Total fights. 62. Unauthorized fights. 60. Amateur fights. 2. Professional fights. 0. Fighting style. Style. Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The physical stats section made him wince. Physical stats. Strength. F+. Speed. F+ at Novelban at. Stamina. F+. Endurance. C+. Agility. F+. Mental stats. Tactical awareness. F+. Focus. F. Damon gazed at his physical stats, a smile spreading across his face as he thought about how far he'd come. His training had paid off, and he could see the improvement in his physicality. But as he looked closer, his smile faded. His stats were stuck on F+, and no matter how hard he trained, he couldn't seem to budge them. He felt a pang of frustration and disappointment. He had been working so hard, pushing himself to his limits, but it wasn't translating to his stats. Damon wondered if he was doing something wrong, if there was something he was missing. He turned his attention to his mental stats, and his confusion deepened. He didn't know how to improve them, didn't know what to do. He thought about reading books, but laughed at the idea. That didn't seem like it would help. Damon sighed, feeling a sense of uncertainty. He didn't know how to move forward, how to improve his mental stats. But he knew he couldn't give up. He had to keep training, keep pushing himself. These were what he was working with, and he would make the most of it. Maybe unlocking the elixir shop would help. Maybe it would give him some answers. But for now, he would continue to train, to improve his skills and techniques. Damon turned off his status interface, the blue light fading from his face. He stood up, brushing himself off by dusting his hands over his clothes. He felt the dry earth and leaves falling away from his skin as he moved. He walked over to the tree, reaching up to unhook the punching bag from the branch. The chain clacked against the trunk as he lifted it down, the sound echoing through the quiet air. Damon slung the bag over his back, feeling the weight of it settle onto his shoulders. He began to jog, his feet pounding against the earth in a steady rhythm. The sound of his footsteps filled the air as he moved, his breathing steady and calm. As he jogged, the trees seemed to pass by him in a blur, their leaves rustling softly in the gentle breeze of the sunset. The sky was painted with warm hues of orange, pink, and purple, casting a golden glow over the landscape. He jogged on, the motel coming into view in the distance. He could see the buildings rising up, the parking lot stretching out before them. Damon arrived at the motel, holding the punching bag properly, and rushed to enter the room. He didn't even try to hide the bag, knowing his mother would ask where he got it. He would just have to come up with a convincing story. As he opened the door, the aroma of cooking food wafted out, making his stomach growl with hunger. He entered the room, punching bag in hand, and his mother looked up from the stove, a questioning expression on her face. Damon sighed, knowing he had a lot of training ahead of him for the next month. His next fight wasn't close, so he planned to use the time to improve his skills. And with the festival month approaching, he hoped to get more opportunities to fight and gain experience. He walked over to his mother, punching bag still in hand, and said, "Hey, Mom. I'm home." His mother looked at the bag, then back at him, a hint of curiosity in her eyes. Damon knew he had to come up with a good story, so he thought quickly. He could tell her he got it from a friend or that he found it somewhere. But for now, he just smiled and said, "I'll tell you later, Mom. I'm starving. What's for dinner?" His mother smiled, seemingly accepting his response, and turned back to the stove. She knew as her son grew up he had his own secrets, she just hoped he wasn't doing illegal stuff to get gear for fighting. Damon breathed a sigh of relief, knowing he had dodged the question for now. He set the punching bag down and took a seat at the table, ready to enjoy his dinner and plan his training for the next month. C64. Chapter 64. Event Opener 1. Michael Bosley, dressed in a suit and tie, looked directly into the camera with an enthusiastic smile. "Today, ladies and gentlemen, we have an exciting one in the card." He gestured with his hands. Daniel Green, sitting beside him, chuckled and added, "I think you say that every show, Michael, but not like I disagree with you. We have a big turnaround, a new show opener, and I'm hoping to see what will happen tonight. You should be excited as well. The camera panned out, showing the packed hall, filled with eager fans wearing Battle Extreme merchandise and holding up signs with their favorite local fighters' names. The commentators' table was set up ringside, with a clear view of the octagon. The sound system blasted energetic music, getting the crowd pumped up for the first fight. Michael continued, "We live here in Stockton. The fans are eager to see some intense action, and we're sure to deliver." Daniel nodded in agreement. "That's right, Michael. We have a stacked card tonight, with some of the toughest fighters in the league. It's going to be a wild ride." The music blasted through the speakers, a high energy beat that got the crowd moving. A short, young man with sandy blonde hair and bright blue eyes bounced into view, his enthusiasm infectious. He was about 5 feet 5 inches with a lean, athletic build, and he moved with a confident swagger. As he made his way to the cage, he stopped by a man who patted him for safety and asked him to for a cup check. Cup. The young fighter obliged, and the cornerman gave him a quick once-over before applying a thin layer of Vaseline to his face. With that done, the young man continued on his way, his eyes fixed intently on the cage. He climbed up the steps and stepped inside, his movements fluid and practiced. The announcer, a tall, imposing figure in a tailored suit, stood in the center of the cage, a microphone in hand. At Nobleman at. As the young man entered, the announcer's voice boomed out across the hall, introducing Edward Whittaker. The crowd responded with a mixture of applause and cheers, some people whistling and shouting his name. Edward smiled, his bright blue eyes shining with excitement, and gave a quick wave to the crowd before turning to face his opponent. As the music for Edward Whittaker's entrance faded away, a new soundtrack began to play, this one with a darker and more ominous tone. The crowd's excitement didn't dwindle but rather shifted to a more anticipatory state, sensing the arrival of the next fighter. A figure emerged from the shadows, his height almost identical to Edward's, around 5 feet 5 inches. His bald head glistened under the bright lights of the arena, and his slimmer body seemed to ripple with defined muscles as he moved. With a focused expression, he made his way to the cage, his eyes fixed intently on the octagon. He stopped by the same cornerman who had checked Edward and underwent the same safety protocols, a quick pat down, a cup check, and a thin layer of Vaseline applied to his face for cuts. As he climbed up the steps and entered the cage, his movements were fluid and deliberate, exuding a sense of calm confidence. The announcer's voice boomed out once more, introducing Felix Grayson. The crowd responded with a mixture of applause and cheers, some people chanting his name, while others whistled and shouted words of encouragement. Felix's expression remained focused, his eyes locked onto Edward Whittaker, his opponent for the night's battle. Michael Bosley turned to Daniel Green, his county commentator, and asked, "Daniel, you know about Edward Whittaker and Felix Grayson, what can you tell us about them?" Daniel nodded, his eyes lighting up with excitement, and began to break down the fighters. "Well, this match is going to be exciting. Let's start with Felix, shall we?" Daniel said, his voice clear and concise. "Here we have a fighter with a decent record, 5-3, with a 2-win streak in his past fights. He's very skilled in karate, has power and speed. What more do you need? Felix is a force to be reckoned with, and his karate background gives him an edge in terms of discipline and technique." Daniel paused, taking a moment to collect his thoughts before moving on to Edward Whittaker. "And then we have Edward, a bit of a special case. I've heard he doesn't have any formal training, he's self-taught, but he's done incredibly well with a record of 2-1 and a win in his last fight. He's a freestyle fighter, most of the time, but I've seen inspiration from kickboxing in most of his moves, so I'm sure he's got good power." Daniel's eyes locked onto the camera, his expression serious. "What's interesting about Edward is that he's a wild card. Without formal training, he's had to rely on his natural ability and instincts to get this far. It's going to be fascinating to see how he matches up against Felix's more disciplined approach." The camera cut to a shot of the two fighters, facing off in the octagon, their eyes locked in a fierce stare. The referee, a seasoned official with a no-nonsense attitude, stood between the two fighters, his eyes scanning their faces as he went over the rules one last time. "All right, gentlemen, let's go over this again. 3 rounds, 5 minutes each. No eye gouging, no groin shots. You know the drill." Edward Whittaker and Felix Grayson nodded, their eyes locked in a fierce stare. They touched gloves, a gesture of respect and sportsmanship, before stepping back to their respective corners. The referee raised his hands, and the crowd fell silent, anticipating the start of the fight. Ready, fight. The bell rang out, and the two fighters sprang into action. The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices echoing off the walls of the arena as the two warriors were about to clash in the center of the octagon. C65. Chapter 65. Event Opener 2. As soon as the bell rang, Edward Whittaker shot out of his corner, his movements explosive. He feinted with a left jab, testing Felix Grayson's reaction. Felix, composed and focused, kept his guard high, stepping to the side and circling away from Edward's power hand. Edward didn't waste time. He closed the distance with a quick 1-2 combination, snapping a jab straight down the middle. Felix slipped the jab and countered with a low leg kick that smacked against Edward's lead leg, the impact reverberating through the octagon. Edward winced but didn't slow down. He switched his stance briefly, throwing a quick overhand right. Felix ducked under it, using his karate discipline to stay calm under pressure. He snapped back up with a straight right hand of his own, catching Edward on the chin. Edward staggered back, more surprised than hurt. He quickly regained his footing, shaking off the strike. Felix took a half step forward, his footwork precise, and launched a powerful body kick that thudded into Edward's side. Edward grunted, feeling the sting of the blow, but immediately fired back with a heavy right hand that Felix barely blocked. The crowd roared as the fighters exchanged blows. Felix moved smoothly, his karate background evident in his accurate strikes and controlled movements. He threw a quick front kick, which Edward hardly evaded, the tip of Felix's toes grazing his midsection. Edward, relying on his instincts, launched a wild flurry of punches. He was unpredictable, mixing in hooks, uppercuts, and a straight left that kept Felix guessing. Felix used his agility to avoid the most dangerous shots, but Edward's relentless attack forced him to back up against the cage. Sensing an opportunity, Edward pressed forward, throwing a vicious left hook aimed at Felix's head. Felix, in a split-second decision, ducked under the hook and exploded forward with a powerful double-leg takedown, lifting Edward off his feet and slamming him to the canvas. At a nobleman at. The crowd exploded with cheers as Felix took control on the ground. He moved quickly, securing side control and pressing his forearm against Edward's neck, limiting his movement. Edward struggled, his body tensing as he tried to buck Felix off him. Felix stayed calm, looking for an opportunity to advance his position. Edward, refusing to be held down, managed to create a small space and slipped out from under Felix, scrambling back to his feet. Felix followed, but Edward was ready, catching him with a quick knee to the body as he rose. The strike was clean, and Felix winced, backing up to create distance. Edward saw the opening and pounced, throwing a high kick aimed at Felix's head. Felix just managed to get his hand up in time, blocking the kick but feeling the force behind it. Edward followed up with a barrage of strikes, mixing up his punches and kicks, his style wild and unorthodox, but effective. Felix stayed composed, weathering the storm. He fired back with a hard straight right that caught Edward on the jaw, momentarily halting his momentum. Felix pressed forward, launching a series of fast, accurate strikes, targeting Edward's body and head with precision. Edward felt the impact of each strike but refused to back down. He absorbed a hard shot to the ribs and retaliated with a spinning backfist that barely missed its mark, grazing Felix's ear. Felix, undeterred, moved in close and unleashed a powerful combination, ending with a sharp elbow that split the skin above Edward's left eye. Blood trickled down Edward's face, but the sight of it only seemed to fuel him. He wiped the blood away with the back of his glove and grinned at Felix, who responded with a nod, acknowledging the challenge. With time running out in the round, both fighters dug deep. Edward switched up his approach, faking a low kick before launching a surprise flying knee. Felix anticipated it, moving to the side just in time, and countered with a swift leg kick that caused Edward to stumble. Felix followed up with a spinning back kick that landed flush on Edward's midsection, the force of the blow pushing him back into the cage. Edward winced, pain radiating from his ribs, but he didn't let it stop him. He fired off a quick jab to keep Felix at bay, then moved off the cage with a burst of speed, re-engaging in the center of the octagon. With the crowd on their feet, the fighters continued to trade shots. Edward's freestyle unpredictability clashed beautifully with Felix's disciplined technique. Neither man gave an inch, each strike more powerful than the last. As the round drew to a close, Felix landed a crisp right cross, causing Edward's head to snap back. Edward retaliated with a powerful left hook that landed clean on Felix's cheek. The two men were breathing heavily, their bodies bruised and battered, but their determination unwavering. The bell finally rang, signaling the end of the round. The fighters stepped back, sweat dripping from their bodies, their faces marked by the exchange of blows. They gave each other a brief nod of respect before turning to their corners. The first round had set the stage for an all-out war, and everyone in the arena knew that the best was yet to come. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the first round, Felix Grayson made his way to his corner, where his coach was waiting with a towel and a water bottle. The coach, a seasoned veteran with a calm demeanor, quickly set to work, giving Felix advice while checking for any injuries. "Felix, listen up," the coach said, his voice steady and focused. "You did well with your kicks, but you need to keep your distance a bit more. Edward's coming in wild, and he's catching you with those hooks. Keep using your jab to control the range." Felix nodded, taking deep breaths as his coach continued. "You've got the right idea with the low kicks. They're slowing him down, but don't get too predictable. Mix it up with some feints and keep him guessing." The coach wiped sweat from Felix's face. "Stay sharp and don't let him catch you off guard. You're letting him get too close." Felix drank from the water bottle, his eyes locked on his coach. "Got it. I'll keep my distance and be more careful." The coach nodded approvingly. "Exactly. Also, watch for his wild spinning attacks. He's trying to catch you with something flashy. Stay focused and counter when you see the openings." Felix took a deep breath, feeling more confident. "Thanks. I'll use my range better and avoid those big swings." C66. Chapter 66. The second round. Michael Bosley and Daniel Green spoke excitedly as the fighters took their corners. "Wow, that first round was intense," Michael said. "Edward's wild style really makes for an exciting fight, while Felix's discipline is something to admire." Daniel nodded. "Absolutely, Michael. Felix has been using his technique effectively, but Edward's unpredictability and resilience keeps him in the fight. And speaking of Edward, that cut above his left eye is starting to bleed more. It could become a problem if it's not controlled." Michael agreed. "Yes, the cut is definitely an issue. It's making Edward's face look worse for wear. But he's showing impressive toughness, not letting it slow him down." Daniel added, "Felix will be capitalizing on the cut, landing strikes that keep opening it up. Edward's going to need to dig deep and find a way to overcome this one." The bell rang for the second round. Edward and Felix met in the center of the octagon. Edward came out strong, throwing a number of fast punches. Felix moved back, using his karate footwork to stay out of range. Felix remembered his coach's advice. He used his jab more to keep Edward at bay. He moved side to side, making it harder for Edward to land a clean shot. Edward tried to close the distance quickly, throwing a heavy right hook. Felix ducked under the hook and responded with a quick front kick to Edward's midsection. The kick landed cleanly, pushing Edward back. Felix followed up with a spinning side kick. Edward blocked it with his forearm but felt the force behind it. Felix's movements were smooth and calculated, showing the benefits of his disciplined training. Edward, feeling the pressure, attempted a high kick. Felix saw it coming and stepped back, avoiding the kick. Felix then used a quick jab and followed with a low kick to Edward's lead leg. The kick hit hard, and Edward limped slightly. Felix moved in with a combination of punches, aiming for Edward's head and body. He used his skills to keep the strikes accurate and powerful. Edward struggled to defend against the precision of Felix's attacks. Edward, showing his resilience, managed to land a clean left hook to Felix's jaw. Felix lost his footing but quickly regained it. He refocused, using his agility to avoid further damage. Felix took a deep breath and began to control the pace. He used more feints and mixed his attacks. He landed a few quick jabs and a solid roundhouse kick to Edward's side. Edward winced but pressed on. Felix's strategy was paying off. He managed to avoid most of Edward's wild swings and focused on landing clean, disciplined strikes. He caught Edward with a cross to the face, which made Edward's head swing back. Seeing an opening, Felix moved in with a powerful combination, ending with a sharp elbow to Edward's cheek. The elbow caused a small cut to reopen above Edward's left eye. Blood trickled down his face, and Edward winced in pain. Felix, seeing the blood flowing freely from the reopened cut, pressed his advantage. He landed a set of jabs and straight punches, each aimed at the damaged area. The cut above Edward's left eye was clearly worsening, and Felix's strikes only made it worse. Michael Bosley commented, "Felix is really taking advantage of that cut. Every punch is landing right where it hurts Edward the most." Daniel Green added, "You can see the blood starting to pour down Edward's face now. Felix's skills are showing. He's targeting that cut with surgical accuracy." Edward, ignoring the pain and blood, fought back fiercely. He threw a wild combination of hooks and uppercuts, trying to overwhelm Felix with his unpredictable style. Felix ducked and weaved, using his karate footwork to evade most of Edward's wild swings. Felix's disciplined approach allowed him to stay out of range, while Edward's aggressive attacks were becoming more desperate. Felix managed to land a clean front kick to Edward's midsection, causing him to take a few back. Edward grimaced, but he quickly recovered and moved back into the center of the octagon. Felix continued to exploit the cut, landing a sharp right cross that caused more blood to spill down Edward's face. Edward, his vision impaired, struggled to keep up with Felix's accurate strikes. At. He tried to retaliate with a high kick, but Felix anticipated it and stepped aside, avoiding the blow. Seeing that Edward was struggling, Felix increased his offensive. He landed a spinning side kick to Edward's ribs, which made Edward wince and take a step back. Felix followed up with a quick jab to the face, landing it right on the cut. The impact caused Edward to stagger, and the referee stepped in to closely observe the situation. When the referee stepped in to pause the fight and called for the ringside doctor, the commentators reacted immediately. Michael Bosley said, "The referee's stepping in. This cut above Edward's eye is looking pretty bad. Felix's targeting has made it worse." Daniel Green added, "It's clear the referee's concerned about the severity of that injury. The doctor's on his way in to check it out." Felix and his coach watched intently from their corner as the doctor examined the cut, checking for any signs that it might be too severe for Edward to continue. The arena fell silent as everyone waited for the decision. This cut is severe and bleeding heavily. If it doesn't stop soon, it could impair his vision and pose a significant risk. I recommend pausing the fight to assess if it's safe for him to continue. The doctor spoke with the referee. Edward, breathing heavily, stood in the center of the octagon, his face marked by blood and bruises. After a few moments of discussion, the referee and the doctor exchanged a few final words. The referee raised his hand, signaling that the fight would be temporarily stopped. The crowd waited anxiously for the final decision. As the doctor continued to assess Edward's injury, the outcome of the fight remained uncertain. C67. Chapter 67. Doctor and referee decision. As the referee and ringside doctor continued to assess Edward's injury, the commentators, Michael Bosley and Daniel Green, provided their analysis. Michael Bosley spoke first, his voice filled with concern. "This is a crucial moment, Daniel. Edward's cut is definitely more severe than before. Felix has been targeting it throughout the round, and it's clearly affecting Edward's performance." Daniel Green nodded in agreement. "Absolutely, Michael. Felix's strategy to focus on the cut has been effective. It's given him a clear advantage, and the doctor's presence here indicates that the injury could be serious. Edward's tough, but this is a significant issue." Michael continued, "You've got to admire Edward's heart. Despite the blood and the pain, he's kept coming forward, showing incredible resilience. But at some point, the cut might just become too much to overcome." Daniel added, "Felix's discipline and technique have really shown through in this round. He's managed to stay composed and exploit the cut effectively. If the fight does continue, it will be interesting to see how Edward responds and if he can adapt to Felix's precision." Michael glanced at the octagon, where Edward was still being evaluated. "Right now, it's up to the doctor and the referee to make the call. It's a tough situation, but safety always comes first. We've seen many fights where a fighter's injury has led to a stoppage, and it looks like we might be on the verge of one here." At. Daniel leaned closer to the camera, his expression serious. "If the fight is stopped, Felix will have earned the win through his smart strategy and effective execution." As they spoke, the ringside doctor finished his evaluation and conferred with the referee. The crowd watched in silence, waiting for the final decision on whether the fight would continue or end due to the injury. In the middle of the crowd, a young man named, his blue eyes fixed intently on the ring, Damon. He had arrived early, with nothing else to do before his own match, and decided to watch the first fight. He had been surprised when one of the fighters, Edward, was the same person he had met in the locker room showers earlier. Damon's interest in the fight grew, and he found himself invested in the outcome. He watched as Edward struggled to continue, his cut worsening with each passing moment. The ringside doctor and referee conferred, their faces grave with concern. As the tension built, Damon sighed, his breath escaping slowly. He felt a tinge of sympathy for Edward, remembering their brief encounter in the locker room. He had seemed like a tough, resilient guy, but now he was on the verge of defeat. Damon's eyes remained fixed on the ring, his mind absorbed in the drama unfolding before him. He wondered what would happen next, whether Edward would be able to continue or if the fight would be stopped due to his injury. The referee approached Edward, his expression serious. He placed a hand on Edward's shoulder and said, "Edward, we have to stop the fight. The cut is too severe." Edward's eyes widened in shock. "No, please," he begged, his voice shaking. "Don't stop it. I can keep going. I need to win this." The referee shook his head. "It's for your safety. The doctor says the cut is too bad." Tears welled up in Edward's eyes. He fought to keep them from falling, his voice trembling as he pleaded. "This is my last chance. My dad, he has cancer. I need this win for him, for us." The referee hesitated, seeing the desperation in Edward's eyes. But the blood was still flowing, and the decision had to be made. "Edward, I'm sorry, but I can't let you continue like this." Edward's shoulders slumped, and he mumbled, "I need to do this, for my dad." His voice was barely a whisper. The referee looked at Edward with a mix of sympathy and regret. "I'm sorry, Edward. We have to stop." Edward stood there, the fight draining out of him as the reality sank in. Although people couldn't hear what was said in the ring, Edward's reaction told them everything. His shoulders slumped. He slowly walked to the edge of the cage and sat down, leaning back, covering his face with his hands. Michael Bosley's voice filled the arena. "This is heartbreaking to see. Edward gave it everything he had, but it looks like the fight is over for him." Daniel Green added softly, "He's worked so hard, and to have it end like this. You can see how much it means to him." The announcer entered the cage, the microphone in hand. The crowd fell silent, waiting for the final word. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice echoed through the arena, "due to a medical stoppage, the referee has called a halt to this contest. Declaring the winner by TKO, Felix Grayson." The crowd cheered, though the mood was subdued. Felix raised his hands in victory, but his eyes lingered on Edward, still sitting by the cage. Michael spoke again. "Felix earned that win, but this was a tough one to watch. Edward gave it his all, and you can see how much it hurts him." Daniel nodded. "He fought with everything he had, but sometimes, it just isn't enough. We wish Edward the best and hope he bounces back from this." Damon stood up, his eyes fixed on the scene before him. He shook his head slowly, taking a deep breath in through his nose and out through his mouth. He turned and made his way to the back. He needed to prepare for his own fight, to focus on his own strategy and technique. As he walked, he couldn't help but think about Edward, who had just suffered a tough defeat. He had seemed so determined, so focused on winning. Damon wondered what had driven him to fight with such intensity. Meanwhile, Edward made his way to the back, his eyes fixed on the ground. He didn't talk to anyone, didn't acknowledge the people around him. He just kept walking, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Felix, on the other hand, was celebrating his win. He was smiling, laughing, and high-fiving his cornerman. He was basking in the glory of his victory, enjoying the cheers of the crowd. As Damon approached the locker room, he could hear the sound of Edward's heavy breathing. He sounded like he was struggling to hold back tears. C-68. Chapter 68. My time now. Damon stood in front of the door, his hand raised to knock. But he hesitated, thinking it was better to leave Edward alone. He seemed to be taking the loss very hard. Damon turned around and walked quickly towards his own room. As he walked, he pushed the thoughts of Edward out of his mind. He didn't want to think about the other fighters' disappointment and frustration. Instead, he focused on his own upcoming fight. Damon knew that losing wasn't the end of the world. He had learned that lesson before. But it was easy to say that now, when he wasn't the one who had lost. He had a temper, and he knew how hard it was to control his emotions when things didn't go his way. Damon entered his room and sat down on the bench, taking a few deep breaths. He tried to clear his mind and focus on the present moment. At Nobleman at. He thought about his own strategy and technique, going over the moves he would make in the ring. He stood up and began to pace back and forth, his mind filled with thoughts of the fight. Damon walked over to the table, where his fighting gear was laid out. He removed the plastic wrapping and began to undress, taking off his clothes and putting on his fighting shorts. He then put on his protective cup, making sure it was securely in place. Next, he wrapped his hands with the bandages, carefully covering his wrists and fingers. He then slipped on his gloves, feeling the familiar weight and texture of the padding. Damon closed his eyes, taking a moment to focus on his breathing. He thought about his training, and how far he had come. He had spent countless hours practicing his basic punches, kicks, and elbows with the new punching bag. When he first started on the punching bag, his proficiency level on basic Muay Thai attacks was at 50%. But now, after a month of intense training, he had improved to 70%. This was a significant gain, and he felt proud of his progress. Damon thought about his technique, going over each move in his mind. He pictured himself throwing perfect jabs, hooks, and uppercuts. He imagined his kicks landing precisely, with power and speed. His mind wandered towards the question mark kick, a more complex move that he was still working on. His proficiency level was at 37%, which was lower than he wanted. But he knew that with continued practice, he would master it. Damon's training sessions with the punching bag had been incredibly helpful. He had seen significant improvement in his technique, and his confidence had grown. He felt more prepared for his upcoming fight, and he was eager to put his skills to the test. With his eyes still closed, Damon took a few more deep breaths, focusing on his mental preparation. He visualized himself winning the fight, his hand being raised in victory. He pictured the crowd cheering. Finally, Damon opened his eyes, feeling ready and focused. Damon finished his mental preparation and stood up. He felt ready. He grabbed his mouthguard from the table and slipped it into his pocket, then headed out of his room. The hallway was quiet, and his footsteps echoed softly as he walked. He could hear faint noises coming from the arena, a reminder that his fight was now. Damon took a deep breath and focused on staying calm. When he reached the entrance to the hall leading to the cage, he paused for a moment. This was it. He walked forward, his mind clear and focused. He could see the lights and hear the crowd more clearly now. The energy was building. As he walked towards the cage, an official stepped forward to check him. The official nodded and said, "Stand still for a moment." Damon followed the instructions. The official checked his gloves, making sure they were secure. Then, he did the cup check, pressing lightly to ensure everything was in place. "All good," the official said, giving Damon a quick nod. "You're ready." Damon nodded back and kept walking, his eyes focused on the cage ahead. He felt the adrenaline starting to rise, but he stayed calm. He knew he had to keep his emotions in check. The announcer's voice boomed through the arena. "Introducing Damon Cross." The crowd responded with cheers, and Damon felt a surge of confidence. He kept walking, one step at a time, towards the cage. He glanced across the cage at his opponent, a shorter fighter named Jackson Lee, as usual. As Damon entered the cage, the commentators began their discussion. Michael Bosley spoke first. "Well, that was quite a tough end for Edward earlier. It's always hard to see a fighter's last chance slip away." Daniel Green nodded. "Yes, it's tough. But now it's time for others to shine. Damon Cross is stepping into the cage next. He's on a 2-0 win streak. His Muay Thai skills are impressive." Michael added, "Damon's been doing great with his kicks and elbows. He's shown strong performance in his last fights." Daniel continued, "His opponent, Jackson Lee, has a strong boxing background. He relies on his punches. It'll be interesting to see how Damon's Muay Thai handles Jackson's boxing." The crowd cheered as Damon and Jackson faced each other. The stage was set for another exciting fight. The referee entered the cage and addressed both fighters. "All right, gentlemen," he said, "I'm going to go over the rules. Obey my commands at all times. Protect yourself at all times. No hitting to the back of the head, no low blows, no grabbing the cage, and no kneeing the groin. If you want to touch gloves, do it now." Damon and Jackson touched gloves. "Fight clean. Fight fair. If you're ready, I'm ready. Let's have a good fight." The referee stepped back to his position and signaled for the fight to begin. "All right, fighters. Ready. Fight." Damon flashed a confident smile, his eyes locking onto Jackson's across the cage. "Just another day in the office," he muttered, his voice low and even. The words were going to be a familiar mantra, a reminder that he'd been in tough spots before and always come out on top. C69. Chapter 69. The Fight. The bell rang, and the fight between Damon Cross and Jackson Lee began. Damon moved forward with confidence, his Muay Thai skills ready to shine. Jackson, shorter and with a boxing background, took a cautious stance, trying to stay out of Damon's range. Damon started with a quick low kick, aiming at Jackson's lead leg. Jackson winced but kept moving. Damon didn't waste time. He threw another low kick, then followed with a straight right hand. Jackson tried to respond with a jab, but Damon ducked and slipped out of the way. Commentators spoke as the fighters moved. Michael said, "Damon's low kicks are looking sharp. He's using his height and reach as well." Daniel added, "Jackson needs to close the distance to use his boxing. But Damon's doing a great job keeping him at bay." Damon continued his attack. He landed another low kick, then added a sharp left elbow to Jackson's side. Jackson staggered slightly but stayed on his feet. He tried to move in with a combination of punches, but Damon blocked and countered with a right cross. Damon's height gave him an advantage. He was able to keep Jackson at a distance, using his longer reach. He landed a few more punches and a heavy elbow strike that made Jackson back up. Jackson looked frustrated, struggling to get past Damon's defense. Michael remarked, "Damon is really controlling the pace here. Jackson seems to be struggling to find his rhythm." Daniel agreed, "Yes, Damon's strikes are landing cleanly. Jackson needs to make a move soon, or he'll be in trouble." Jackson tried to close the distance again, throwing a combo of punches. Damon blocked most of them and then responded with another low kick that landed with a thud. Jackson's leg bent slightly, and he took a step back. Damon saw his chance. He moved in with a powerful right hook, connecting with Jackson's jaw. Michael's voice rose with excitement. "Damon's showing why he's on a win streak. Jackson is struggling to stay upright." Daniel added, "Damon's timing is perfect. He's landing those shots with precision. Jackson looks like he's in trouble." Jackson's head flew back, and he staggered. Damon followed up with a number of quick punches. Jackson tried to defend, but Damon was too fast. Damon landed a final, clean right hand to Jackson's chin. Jackson's legs gave way, and he fell to the mat. The crowd gasped as Jackson fell, and Damon moved in quickly. Damon landed 2 hammer fists, pounding Jackson's head with heavy, relentless strikes. Each blow landed with a thud, shaking Jackson's body. The referee jumped in, pulling Damon off and waving his arms to signal the end of the fight. Michael exclaimed, "Oh, that's it. Damon finished it with those hammer fists. What a performance." Daniel agreed, "Incredible finish. Damon showed his power and skill. Jackson couldn't handle that." As Damon stood over Jackson, who lay unconscious, he smirked and said, "Good night." Michael and Daniel continued their commentary as the arena buzzed with excitement. Michael said, "What a performance by Damon Cross. This is his first clean knockout. He dominated from the start and ended it in the first round." His voice was filled with enthusiasm, capturing the energy of the crowd. Daniel added, "Absolutely, Michael. Damon is on the right path. This win shows his Muay Thai skills and his ability to finish a fight quickly. He's looking strong and focused despite doing it all alone." He nodded approvingly as he spoke. Michael agreed, "It's impressive to see him get the finish so early. Damon's clearly making a name for himself in this division." He leaned forward, emphasizing Damon's rising reputation. Daniel shook his head slightly and said, "Although Damon is good, going up a weight class might benefit him more. With his height, fighting at flyweight is just embarrassing. He'd be more dominant against bigger opponents." Michael responded, "That's a valid point, Daniel. Damon's skills are undeniable, but moving up could give him even more of an edge." The announcer walked into the cage with a steady stride, microphone in hand. At Nobleman at. Jackson Lee had already regained his senses and was talking with his corner men. Damon Cross stood alone in the center, his gaze focused, awaiting the official decision. The referee, standing between the two fighters, took hold of their wrists, preparing to declare the victor. The crowd quieted down, eager to hear the final result. The announcer raised the microphone to his lips, his voice booming through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, referee John Doe has called a stop to this contest at 2 minutes, 35 seconds of the very first round, declaring the winner by knockout." The pause added to the tension even though everyone already knew who won. Every eye in the arena focused on the center of the cage. The announcer's voice rose as he called out, "Damon Cross." The crowd erupted into cheers, their energy filling the venue. The referee lifted Damon's hand high, signaling his victory. Damon allowed a small, confident smile to cross his face as he soaked in the applause. Damon shook the referee's hand, then the announcer's, as a sign of respect. Next, he walked over to Jackson, who was still recovering from the knockout. Damon extended his hand, and Jackson took it, his eyes narrowing slightly, pulling him into a hug. "I heard you said goodnight to me," Jackson said, his voice laced with a hint of annoyance. "Maybe you should go pick on guys your own size." He stepped back, forcing a smile onto his face. Damon glared at Jackson, feeling a surge of irritation. He couldn't deny it. Jackson's words were getting to him. It wasn't like they were lies, either. Damon had been dominating the fight, and his height and reach had given him a significant advantage. But Damon pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on his goal. He was going to fight the last match, then request to change weight classes to a suitable from Mr. Steele. In his mind, the next fight was already a guaranteed win. C70. Chapter 70. Second Chance. Damon walked out of the hall, closing the door behind him. He let out a deep sigh, feeling a mix of relief and satisfaction. As he made his way down the hallway, he noticed some of the staff nodding in congratulations. He smiled and grinned, acknowledging their recognition. He continued walking towards the room assigned to him, his footsteps echoing off the walls. The hallway was quiet, with only a few people milling about. Damon's mind was still on the fight, replaying the moments that led to his victory. As he turned a corner, he saw Mr. Steele standing outside his room. Mr. Steele was leaning against the wall, his arms crossed and a serious expression on his face. Damon felt a slight sense of unease, wondering what Mr. Steele wanted to talk about. "Hey, Mr. Steele," Damon said, approaching him. "What's up?" Mr. Steele pushed off the wall and stood up straight. "Damon, congratulations on your win," he said, his voice firm but neutral. "You're doing well on our challenge." Damon nodded, feeling a sense of pride. "Thanks, Mr. Steele. I've been working hard." Mr. Steele's words hung in the air, his voice low and serious. "I can see your improvement, but now, your next match might be the last time we meet, or the start of something." Damon nodded, taking a deep breath in through his nose and out through his mouth. He knew what was at stake. If he lost, he would lose the opportunity to have Mr. Steele's support. Mr. Steele's eyes seemed to bore into Damon's soul, as if searching for something. "Your next opponent will be dangerous, and I mean this." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "He will want it more than you." Damon felt a shiver run down his spine. Who was this opponent that would want it so badly? Mr. Steele's hand came down on Damon's shoulder, his grip firm but not crushing. "So Damon, I don't want you to tell me you want this. I want you to show me." His voice was firm, commanding. Damon nodded again, determination rising up inside him. Mr. Steele fixed his suit. He began walking away, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Damon watched him go, his mind racing with thoughts of his next opponent. Who was he? What made him so dangerous? Damon walked into his room, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. He went straight to his bag and pulled out a fresh set of clothes, eager to change out of his sweaty gear. But first, he needed a shower. He had been yearning for one since the match ended, and now he couldn't wait to feel the warm water on his skin. He made his way to the showers, his feet carrying him towards the sound of running water. At Nobleman at. When he got there, he saw that one of the showers was already in use, but he didn't mind. He got into the next one, feeling the cool tile beneath his feet. As he undressed, he couldn't help but think about the match. He was happy about how it had gone. Not many hits had caught him, and if any had, they hadn't been hard enough to leave a mark. He felt proud of himself, proud of his training and his skill. The water was warm when he turned it on, and he stepped under it with a sigh of relief. It cascaded down his body, washing away the sweat and grime of the match. He closed his eyes, letting the water soak into his skin, and felt his muscles relax. The sound of the water was soothing, a steady beat that blocked out all other noise. Damon felt himself becoming calm, his mind quieting as the water washed over him. He stood there for a long time, just enjoying the feeling of the shower, and the satisfaction of his victory. Once he finished his shower, Damon dried himself off and got dressed in fresh clothes. He left the locker room and headed back to his room to grab his bag. As he made his way out of the building, he bumped into Edward, who had been through a rough match. Edward's face was busted up, with bruises and cuts all over it. His eyes looked like they had taken a beating, with dark circles and puffy skin, especially the left one. Damon approached him, stretching out his hand to Edward. "Sup man," he said, with a friendly smile. Edward smiled back, despite the pain in his eyes. He shook Damon's hand. "Hey man, ha ha ha, nice match," he said, complimenting Damon on his win. Damon scratched his head. "To you as well, even though you lost, you did amazing, so don't beat yourself over it, you'll get next time," he said, trying to reassure Edward. But Edward's face changed, his expression turning serious. "You don't understand, my dad," he started to say, but Damon interrupted him. "Hey, I think Mr. Steele is calling for you," Damon said, nodding towards Mr. Steele, who was standing across the hallway, pointing at Edward. Edward's face showed a flash of fear, before he turned and walked towards Mr. Steele. "Wait for me," he said, looking back at Damon. Damon waited, looking at Mr. Steele talk with Edward. He wondered if Edward had gotten the same offer as him. Maybe that's why his loss had gotten him so emotional. Damon began to sympathize with Edward, thinking about how tough it must be to face such high stakes. As he watched, Edward smiled at Mr. Steele, but when he turned around, his face was serious and cold. Damon walked towards him, but Edward passed him by as if he didn't exist. He was confused as he watched Edward's back disappear into the distance. He stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Why had Edward ignored him like that? And what had Mr. Steele said to him to make him look so serious? Damon's mind was full of questions as he watched Edward walk away. He felt a sense of unease, wondering what was going on. P.